We're now live, Chair. You are now live, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I'll start at 5 o'clock. Thank you very much. I think we've got 1 minute.
There's someone in the attendees called website team. I'm not sure who that is.
I don't know who that is. I haven't seen that name before, or group or people.
So I've disabled chat, so it's difficult for me to ask them, but I can...
No, well, maybe ask someone else, one of the other.
I could temporarily allow chat.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Bear with me.
They've gone, Chair, but they're allowed to be there anyway.
I don't know who they are.
We don't know if it's our missing speaker. I think that's what we were looking at.
Might be.
Yeah, you are now live, so all this is going out on YouTube.
Yeah. Right. Good evening and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Plans Committee for Charnwood Borough Council. Please note that this virtual meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website following the meeting. Under the openness of local government bodies regulations, people may film or record this meeting, and this is outside the Council's control. However, people wishing to film or record the meeting should do so in a way that does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Also, so that the meeting is not disturbed, could I ask everybody present, please turn off your mobile phones or switch them to silent and ensure that your environment is distraction-free. In addition, please turn off or move smart speakers such as Alexa, Siri, Cortana, etc., as these record conversations, and this could be a breach of GDPR. As you know by now, members will need to introduce themselves and state their name and confirm that they can hear and see the proceedings. And we will be using the raise hand feature in the participant section of the Zoom software to speak, and will be allowed to do so in a queue system, and voting will be undertaken by roll call of all present in alphabetical order. Each member will state their name and how they wish to vote, for, against, or abstain. Speakers will be called forward at the appropriate time by the chair, and their microphones will be unmuted by the co-host. Speakers have 5 minutes each, and they will be timed by the co-host. When you have 1 minute of time remaining, you will be advised. The co-host will mute you at the end of your 5 minutes. If there are any technical problems without side speakers presenting, then I will read out the speaker's statement, which has been sent in advance of the meeting. I'm now going to call out the names of each member in alphabetical order to confirm their attendance. Councillor Bentley.
Hello, Chair. Yes, I can both see and hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Camsell. I think you're still muted, Councillor Camsell. You're still muted.
Is that better, Chair?
Thank you.
Yeah, I can both hear and see the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Capleton.
Good evening, Chair. I can confirm that I can see and hear proceedings.
Councillor Charles.
Good evening, Chair. I can confirm that I can see and hear proceedings.
Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I confirm that I can both see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Councillor Howe, who is substituting for Councillor Grimley.
Good evening, Chair. I can confirm I can see and hear the meeting.
Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I confirm I can see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Ransom.
Thank you, Chair. I can both hear and see the proceedings.
Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Chair. I can both hear and see the proceedings.
Councillor Tassell.
I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Thank you. And Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you very much indeed, councillors. And I am Hilary Fryer, and I'm the chair of the Plans Committee. I'm now going to confirm the officers that are in attendance. I have Mrs. Jackson, who's the Group Leader, Development Management. Lewis Marshall, Principal Planning Officer. Louise Winson, Principal Planning Officer. Deborah Liggins, Senior Planning Officer. Catherine Harrison, the Legal Advisor to the committee. And Ed Brown, who is the Democratic Services Officer taking the minutes of this meeting and the co-host. And Nikki Morgan, who is the host of this meeting. If I move to Mr. Brown, to Ed Brown, to confirm the speakers who are in the virtual public gallery.
Yeah, the speakers are all in the virtual waiting room, Chair.
Thank you. So we have a number, so they'll call them forward when we get to the application in question. We do have one that is an item 2, which is the application at Wymesville, and we've had a request from the Parish Council of Wymesville if a Joe Ling could speak on the behalf of the Parish Council. This is a late application, so if that is all right with the committee, if you are unhappy about that decision or that request, could you please indicate? Otherwise, I will take it that we are happy with it this time. No one has indicated that that isn't all right. So we will allow Ms. Ling on this occasion to address the committee when we get to that application. We have any apologies? We have Councillor Dan Grimley, I believe, and Councillor Julian Lowe is substituting for him. Could you confirm, please, Ed Brown?
Yes, I've received apologies from Councillor Grimley, Chair, and Councillor Lowe will be substituting.
Thank you. Item 2 on your agenda, questions under committee procedure 12.8. I've had no questions submitted. I'm presuming there's no late ones have come in, Mr. Brown?
No questions have been received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3, disclosures of personal and pecuniary interest. Are there any disclosures of interest?
Chair,
if you'd like to go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Chair, I can confirm that Councillor Tassell has an interest in application number P/20/1347/2 for 62 Iveshead Road, Shepshed. She will be speaking as an objector on this item and will not be taking part in the meeting discussion or voting thereon in. I can also confirm that Councillor Savage has an interest in application number P/20/1347/2 and the same address, 60 Iveshead Road, Shepshed. He's the owner of a business in the area and will not be taking part in the meeting discussion or voting thereon in.
Thank you. And I believe the Councillor Ward, you wanted to speak under this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I am one of the ward councillors for Haddon, which is on item 3 of the planning applications, P/20/2373/2. But I do come to the meeting with an open mind, and I haven't discussed this application with anybody else.
You.
I'm sorry, but can I come in here? I've got no raise hand feature. It's all gone. I can't raise my hand.
Blame me.
Well, I'll just keep an eye out for you.
Sorry, Chair, can I also quickly say, sorry, I got it wrong earlier when I said that it's Councillor Howell substituting rather than Councillor Lowe, sorry. Councillor Grimley, sorry.
Thank you very much. Councillor Council.
Yeah, item 4, the Gisborough Way. I'm the ward councillor, but I've got open mind on it.
Thank you. Right. Okay. There are no other further discussions. We now move on to the planning application. Today's meeting, we have 3 applications to consider, and their details are set out in the agenda and the extras report. And I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Bentley, who will take the first item as Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So the first item is planning application number P/20/1347/2, and that'll be presented to us by Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just bear with me while I share the slides. Okay, so for item 1, we're at Shepshed and considering a full application for 63 dwellings with associated works, landscaping and open space at land to the rear of and including 62 Iveshead Road. Just in order of business, before we get into the presentation, I did just want to bring a small error in the report to your attention on the first page, where it erroneously states that the site is within Shepshed West, when in fact the site falls within Shepshed East. The ward boundary is actually Iveshead Road itself, but the site is within Shepshed East. The application site is a parcel of agricultural land to the southern edge of Shepshed that includes number 62 Iveshead Road, a bungalow that will be demolished to provide access to the wider site. The site comprises of 2 fields located behind and to the east of an existing row of bungalows on Iveshead Road. The site is also bordered by the pastures, which is a small development of 1.5-storey properties set behind Iveshead Road, adjacent to the site's south-western boundary. The 2 fields are defined by a central belt of hedgerow and trees within, with the western field now open land being a former nursery market garden. The southern site boundary is defined by trees and hedgerows, beyond which lies Iveshead Lane, which is a narrow country lane, and the open countryside is beyond. The northern and eastern site boundaries are shared with Morley Quarry, a now disused quarry and local wildlife site. The site is within the Charnwood Forest, which is obviously a distinct character area which forms part of the National Forest. Just so members are aware of where the site is in relation to the rest of Shepshed. This is a satellite image of the southern side of Shepshed, with the site marked by the yellow star there. This slide shows the site in more detail. So the site is edged in red. There is Iveshead Road to the west, Morley Quarry to the north, east, and Iveshead Lane to the south. And what you'll appreciate from the site photographs in a moment is that the site levels gradually increase to the south and eastern boundaries of the site, with the highest part of the site being within the southeastern corner where it meets Iveshead Lane. So moving on to the site photographs, this is taken from Iveshead Road itself, looking south up the hill, with the site being beyond the houses in the foreground on the left-hand side. This is the property at 62 Iveshead Road, which would be demolished to provide access to the site. This photo is taken from the proposed access point, looking up the hill towards the junction with Iveshead Lane. And again, looking north down the hill in the direction towards the town. One thing to note from the photographs is the relatively varied styles, periods and scales of existing development along Iveshead Road. This image is taken further south along Iveshead Road, looking back towards the proposed access, which would be located beyond the recently extended white dormer bungalow you can see in the centre of the image there. This image is taken from the junction with Iveshead Lane, which goes off to the right-hand side. So the extent of the site is actually set behind the row of houses which are on the right-hand side of the road. So this image is taken from the highest point of the site, which, as I said, is to the southeastern corner. Looking to the left-hand side of the image, you can see the more recently constructed properties within the pastures, which are the 1.5-storey properties there, which are sort of set behind those properties that front Iveshead Road. And then beyond that, you can see the roofscape of those properties constructed as part of the Blaws development on the other side of Iveshead Road. This is taken from the eastern boundary of the site, again looking down towards Iveshead Road and the pastures. And again, this is also taken from the eastern boundary, but is looking northwest. And finally, this is taken from the same position, but looking south towards Iveshead Lane, which is defined by the row of trees and hedgerows you can see there. And obviously the countryside beyond that, which obviously rises beyond Iveshead Lane. So in terms of the proposed development, the application proposes 63 dwellings with the landscaping, open space and access from Iveshead Road. The layout is relatively simple in its form, with the use of a grid-like street pattern that works its way around the site with a series of smaller private drives. The layout has been considerate of the site's location on the edge of the settlement, with existing landscaping and buffers provided to the site boundaries. So you'll note the existing trees and hedgerows to the edge of Iveshead Lane along the southern boundary are to be retained, and the site has also given sort of generous standoff to Morley Quarry to the north, given its status as a local wildlife site. The layout has also had regard for existing trees and hedgerows that define the two fields. So other than where gaps are needed to create the roads, the hedgerow that runs down through the middle of the site is retained as a natural landscape feature. The layout has also had regard for the position and proximity to existing neighbouring dwellings, with the provision of open space and landscape buffers between the site and those properties along Iveshead Road and the pastures. Iveshead Lane is a sort of popular walking route, so in addition to the main access onto Iveshead Road, a secondary informal pedestrian access is proposed onto Iveshead Lane, which is just there. There are 13 affordable homes proposed in total, which are separated into two groups, with a small group of 4 to the southwestern corner, which is served by its own private drive, which is also shared with an open market dwelling. And then there are a further group of 9 to the north of that, accessed by another private drive, with this group split into a group of 4, a terrace of 3 and a pair of semi-detached units. It's also worth noting that plots 54 and 63, which are these two here, adjacent to the pastures, are affordable bungalows. Members will note from the objections raised, there's been a lot of discussion and concern from residents around the heights of the buildings, and this plan shows the location of the various different scales proposed, with the yellow blocks depicting the single-storey development, the purple the 2-storey, and the light blue showing the 2.5-storey buildings. One thing I would point out to members is that the taller 2.5-storey units are kept away from existing site boundaries and are largely contained by single or 2-storey units either side, to limit any visual prominence when viewed from beyond the site boundaries, which is consistent with the expectations of a previous inspector that had considered the site. So in terms of translating the previous plan to what the development will look like on the ground, these are or an example of the house types proposed. There are 8 different house types proposed altogether, with a combination of open market and affordable housing, which are to have a mix of render and brick in terms of external materials. And then to assist members further, the applicant has provided some CGI images to show what the house types will look like in more detail. So there is a mix of detached, semi-detached and rows of terraces with a mix of materials, but all relatively traditional in style and appearance, which is obviously reflective of the site's location. This slide just shows a couple of street scenes so members can understand what the various house types will look like grouped together, with the top one being on the southern side of the access road as you enter the development, and the bottom street scene is taken from the private drive situated in the southwestern corner of the site, which is adjacent to the pastures. And then again, this image is another CGI provided by the applicant for the purpose of the meeting to assist members, just to give an impression of what the development will look like. So this is a view looking east up the main access road. So the houses on the right you see there are those that were featured on the top of the previous slide. And then obviously just to the left of that is the location of the public open space. Just very quickly, this slide shows the proposed access to Iveshead Road. As you saw from the photos, Iveshead Road is a very straight road with wide verges, so there is no concern in respect of visibility or highway safety. And the proposals include a number of crossing points across the mouth of the access, but also across Iveshead Road itself. There's also a 2 metre wide footway along both sides of the access leading into the development. So in terms of key considerations for members, the site is located outside of the defined settlement limits as defined by Save Local Plan Policy ST2, and is located in the countryside, and therefore CT1 applies. But as members will know, these policies carry reduced weight due to their age and inconsistency with the NPPF. And any conflict with these policies needs to be considered in the overall planning balance. In terms of policy CS1 of the core strategy, which is arguably the most important policy in the determination of the application, the policy seeks to provide at least 1,200 homes within or adjoining Shepshed over the course of the planned period. And to date, there have been 1,137 commitments and completions. So there is some capacity for additional growth adjoining Shepshed in line with the core strategy. And as such, it is not considered that the proposal conflicts with policy CS1. It's also worth noting, as set out in the report, that an appeal inspector has granted outline permission for 103 dwellings on this site in 2014. That consent has now lapsed, but it is a material consideration for members to take into account. In terms of housing mix, there is a mix of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom homes which will meet identified needs in accordance with policy CS3, and a policy compliant 20% affordable homes are also proposed, 2 of which are bungalows. In terms of the design, layout and landscaping, the house type designs respond adequately to the local context as required by the relevant policies and the design SPD. It is considered that the layout and design provide for a high standard of amenity for existing and future residents, and there will be no unacceptable adverse landscape impact. And finally, the proposal will provide different typologies of on-site open space in accordance with policy CS15. In terms of highway safety and access, the local highway authority has raised no objections to the application and advises that the access, road layout and parking provision is designed in accordance with their standards. Crucially, Shepshed is one of our most sustainable settlements, and the site is therefore considered to be in a sustainable location with good access to local services and amenities without being solely reliant on the private car. And overall, there would be no unacceptable or severe impact on the highway network in accordance with the NPPF. As set out on pages 23 and 24 of the report, this slide sets out the contributions which have been determined to be SIL compliant, so they're necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms and directly related in scale and kind to the development, and also been agreed by the developer. In terms of other matters, the application has been supported by an ecological appraisal and biodiversity impact assessment, which includes that when taking into account the ecological value of the existing site, as well as on-site mitigation measures such as new areas of planting and water attenuation, there would still remain a biodiversity loss on site. So it is proposed that, in line with the NPPF, off-site compensation is secured to mitigate this harm. So moving to the planning balance, overall, the proposal has been carefully assessed against the comments and consultation responses received, and the policies of the development plan and the National Planning Policy Framework. The application would contribute 63 dwellings to the council's housing land supply, including 20% affordable housing, in a sustainable location that would accord with policy CS1 of the core strategy. Without a 5-year housing land supply, this should be attributed significant positive weight. The development would support jobs and the local economy, join construction, and with lasting benefits of expenditure and employment of residents. This should be given limited positive weight. Proposed green infrastructure, which includes open spaces, would contribute to the health and well-being of existing and new residents. This again should be given limited positive weight. There would be a biodiversity loss on site, but this can be mitigated off-site with the contribution agreed, and as such the development will have a neutral impact in the longer term. Negatively, obviously the proposal will result in the loss of countryside and agricultural land. However, in this case, the policies that seek to protect countryside at this location carry reduced weight, and any conflict with such policies would not outweigh the benefits of the scheme. It's therefore concluded that the adverse impacts of granting planning permission would not significantly outweigh the benefits that the scheme would offer at a time where the council is not able to demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. The application is therefore recommended for approval subject to conditions as set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. We've got 4 speakers on this application. Is Mr. Andy Beer and Councillor Joan Tassell available? Joan Tassell, I can see you there. Do you wish to go first, or do you wish Mr. Andy Beer to go first?
I'm going first, and then Andy's carrying on with the other. We're having 5 minutes between us.
Okay, are you having 2.5 minutes each?
Yes, thereabouts, yes.
Okay, did you want an indication given to you at 30 seconds, when 30 seconds remaining?
You can do, thank you very much.
Okay, if I can ask Mr. Brown to indicate 30 seconds remaining, and if you'd like to do the same.
Excuse me, but do I have to leave I have to leave, don't I? I can't stay here and speak. I think I have to leave and go somewhere.
Mr. Brown, can you advise on this?
She will need to leave after her speech. She's up first, isn't she?
Yes, she is. Yeah. Okay. So, Councillor Tassell, if you'd like to speak first and then leave the meeting.
Excuse me, Chair. I think she should turn her camera off.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're absolutely right, Chair. Councillor Tassell, if you'd like to turn your video off, please. Okay. Thank you very much. And would you like to start when you're ready?
Can you hear me now? Thank you.
Yes,
Dear members, the application you are dealing with this evening was refused by Charnwood Borough Council in 2014. It then went to appeal in 2016. It was granted at this appeal as a windfall development after the core strategy had been accepted and signed. Subsequently, the site was sold to Strata Homes, who submitted a reserved planning application in 2017. This was again refused. It went to appeal, and it is on the premise of this dismissal document dated 22nd of March 2018 that our objections are based. On page 3, item 14, the inspector refers to the 3-storey houses being of concern. However, he then states he can see no problem as they are situated away from the present properties. This is not now the case. At the time of the hearing, there were only 13 3-storey houses on this site, mainly in the lower part of the development. The inspector could see no problems with this amount of taller houses or their positions. However, what is now proposed is 32 of these taller houses, and these are now proposed for the higher ground. These will be over-dominant for the local area. Item 15 on page 3 states that the site must take into account the topography of the site for taller houses. The design of this site is exactly the opposite to what the inspector suggested. On page 2 of the inspector's report, item 7 looks at the effect that the proposed details will have on the existing properties and asks whether or not the proposed property types are acceptable. IZ Road is mainly architect-designed bungalows and two-storey houses. Charnwood Borough Council has a policy of good design and
30
affording
seconds remaining.
pleasant street scene. However, this development does not give this. When the developer was asked to change the design, only the front doors were altered and some have had wooden canopies added. The inspector in his site report says he's visited a recently completed development in the area. Page 4, item 17 refers to this visit as of good design. The inspector's report has been completely disregarded in the design of this development. Therefore, I ask that the inspector's report be taken into consideration when determining the outcome of this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beer, if you're available, I think you are. You can start when you're ready, and when you've got 30 seconds remaining, Mr. Brown will indicate. Mr. Beer, can you hear me? Mr. Brown, is Mr. Beer available?
He's here.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Beer, you may start when you're ready, and when you've got 30 seconds remaining, Mr. Brown will indicate.
Okay. I would like to concentrate on the western boundary, as this is the area which will have the greatest impact on existing residents. At every stage of this potential development, it has been recommended that properties along this boundary should either be moved further away from existing properties or become bungalows in order to reduce their impact. This was recommended at the first appeal hearing, which granted outline planning in the first place. It was then pointed out in the second reserved matters appeal hearing that, and I quote, taken in the round, it is difficult to see how the submitted proposal has addressed the reasoning of the original decision maker. This is an extremely important point, as this was a caveat from the initial outline planning, which is still yet to be addressed. In the reserved matters refusal report, it states, combination of two-storey height, potential for large trees growing along boundary blocking height, and combination of shallow gardens and rising land would result in a scale and layout which would appear oppressive to existing residents. Also, along the western boundary, the combination of mainly single-storey form and topography mean that careful consideration needs to be given to siting and height of any proposed buildings along this boundary. The inspector goes on to call the 2 and 3 metre buffer a token gap, which is a relationship more akin to within housing development rather than edge of settlement development, such as proposed here. It is clear that the inspectors intended to protect existing residents along this border by either building bungalows or moving the development further away. These plans still do not meet these recommendations. These are not the views of a few irritating residents. They are recommendations of government-appointed inspectorates, and if we are not to be guided by them, then whom? There are 2.5-storey properties behind the pastures now. And
30 seconds remaining.
This is bad planning. Residents have also received a letter of support from our MP, Jane Hunt, which should also hold sway with regards to this proposed development. I thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Beer. Next person to speak is on behalf of the applicant is Claire Linley, Lloyd Anglesey, for any design related questions. She's the applicant.
I'm just bringing them in now.
Available?
Just bring them in.
Thank you. That's good. I can see you. You've got 5 minutes. After 1 minute, Mr. Brown will indicate to you you have 1 minute remaining. But after 5 minutes, you'll have to stop. Okay, thanks. Continue when you're ready.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Speaker's video. So the speaker's videos should be off.
Claire Linley, I'm afraid.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just.
Oh.
So I do apologise. I didn't realise it was being shared. So you have 2.5 minutes each. Who would like to go first?
It's just myself speaking. Lloyd's just here just in case anyone did have any questions further along in the meeting.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so if you'd like to go first, you've got 2.5 minutes. I'm assuming you're sharing it 50-50 with Lloyd Anglesey.
No, it's just myself speaking.
Oh, just yourself speaking, right? Okay, thank you. So you have 5 minutes. After 4 minutes, and with 1 minute remaining, Mr. Brown will indicate. Okay, thank you. When you're ready.
Good evening, Chair and members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm not going to repeat everything the planning officer has said within his report, but I do just want to outline the key points that I believe the committee should bear in mind today when considering the application. As many of you are probably aware, this site has a fairly long planning history. Planning permission was previously granted for 77 homes on the site by a planning inspector. Our scheme before you today proposes only 63. We've worked extremely closely with officers over the last 2 years, and the scheme has been discussed with local ward councillors and the local community. This engagement has shaped the scheme to that which is presented today and is fully supported by officers. I just wanted to highlight the changes we've made to the scheme to demonstrate how we've listened to councillors, residents and the planning officers. The previous application was submitted with standard strata house types. Officers were not happy with the design of the dwellings. So as part of this application, we've created bespoke house type designs and have added details and variations in materials to better reflect the character of the surrounding area. These designs respond to and complement the local vernacular and architectural style and palette and are now supported fully by officers. Residents of the closest properties within the pastures were concerned about the impact on their homes. To address this, we've changed the house types that border these houses to bungalows, as well as providing a landscape buffer between the gardens of the bungalows and the pastures. And the bungalows are also side on to these properties. At the rear of the other properties along Iveshead Road, we're providing the landscape buffer, which is also wider in this location, as well as 2-storey dwellings, but next to long gardens. Previously, these plots were shown as 2.5 stories, so we have amended the scheme to address those comments. These new homes are separated by the landscape buffer and either positioned side on or at the end of long gardens to minimise the impact on the existing homes. Following comments from the council's ecologist, we've removed 5 homes from the northern area of the site to increase the separation distance to the neighbouring Morley Quarry, so that's now supported by the ecologist. We were also asked by local ward members to add a pedestrian link to Iveshead Lane to increase connectivity to the surrounding area, and this request has been met on the revised plans. All the changes that we've been asked to make have been addressed on the final plans before you. I also wanted to briefly mention the benefits of the scheme. As you're aware, the council currently cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and new homes are needed quickly within Charnwood. This site provides an opportunity to deliver housing quickly. The site is located in a sustainable location next to an existing residential area and within convenient walking distance of the centre of Shepshed. Future residents will be able to access key local facilities by walking and cycling and won't need to rely on their cars. The inspector noted this as a positive of the site in the previous appeal decision. There are no road safety issues predicted to arise from the proposals, and the residual cumulative impacts of the development are not considered to be severe within the context of the MPPF. Importantly, we are providing the full requirement of affordable homes, and the split between shared ownership and affordable rent is fully supported by your housing strategy officer. We're providing all Section 106 contributions that have been requested. This equates to over £1 million to be spent on community infrastructure by the council and works out at over £17,000 per new home. In summary, this is a highly sustainable housing scheme, and the principle of residential development on the site has already been established through the granting of planning permission for 77 homes on the site previously. Our scheme of 63 homes will bring high quality development to this area of Shepshed and will bring forward much needed new housing on this sustainable site, as well as contributing significantly to the delivery of new infrastructure within Charnwood. I would therefore ask the committee to support the officer recommendation to defer and delegate the application subject to the signing of the Section 106 agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. We can now call upon Mr. Peter Granger on behalf of Shepshed Town Council. Mr. Brown, is Mr. Peter Granger available?
Yes, I'm just bringing him in now.
Thank you.
He should be able to speak now. He's been brought in as a panelist.
Mr. Granger, can you hear me?
He's on mute still.
Councillor, that's it.
I've got you.
Councillor Granger, you have 5 minutes. After 4 minutes, Mr. Brown will indicate you have 1 minute remaining. So you may start when you're ready.
Good evening, members. Let me introduce myself. I am Councillor Peter Granger, Chairman of the Shepshed Town Council. After studying and considering the planning application of 62 Iveshead Road, the Shepshed Town Council wish to officially object to the following 10 points. Point 1. 32 of the properties are 2.5 to 3 stories in height, therefore are not in keeping with the surrounding properties. They are mainly bungalows. The side windows of the proposed houses will be overlooking the bungalows. Point 2. The overall design of the proposed properties are all very basic, and the assortment of styles very limited, and more suitable for large town centres or city environment where space and high density is desirable. Point 3. The affordable houses are cluttered together instead of evenly distributed throughout the development. Point 4. The current drainage systems are damaged and inadequate, which cannot cope with at the present time whenever there is a heavy downpour. Point 5. Iveshead Road is already a very busy thoroughfare and an emergency services route, therefore would not sustain the extra traffic created by additional 62 properties. It would only exacerbate the current flow, particularly at peak times. Point 6. There are no facilities, doctors, schools, chemists or shops within 800 metres from the proposed development, with the exception of a garage forecourt. Therefore, this makes this development unsustainable. Point 7. The nearest bus stop is 400 metres away. Point 8. Most importantly, the development does not comply with the government inspector's comments. The original approval of March 2018 did not include as many 2.5 to 3 story properties, but did include bungalows. Point 9. The proposal still conflicts with most, if not all, of the planning policies: CS1, development strategy; CS2, high quality density; CS11, landscape and countryside; EVL1, the local plan and design. And in terms of housing mix, this does not meet the HEDNA suggestions. And point 10, there are 2 large oak trees on the boundary of Iveshead Lane that should be registered as TPOs. A well-established hedge running through the site, this should be retained and protected whilst any development is taking place, and no access should be allowed onto Iveshead Lane. As chairman of the council, I would like to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to express our concerns we have over this development. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can you turn your video off, please, Mr. Granger? Thank you. Mr. Granger, we can't hear you.
I've brought him. I put him back into as an attendee.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. Lastly, we have Councillor Robin Popley. Would like to speak. Is Mr. Brown? Is Mr. Popley available, please?
Just bringing him in now.
Thank you.
Hello, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Popley. You have 5 minutes. Mr. Brown will indicate after 4 minutes that you have 1 minute remaining. You may start when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, fellow members, officers, may I first take this opportunity to thank you for allowing me to present these submissions to you here this evening. P/20/1347/2 relate to proposals for 63 new dwellings to be built on land which lies to the rear of 62 Iveshead Road in Shepshed. A rhetorical question perhaps, but I do wonder if members of tonight's committee have been able to read the recommendations in the inspector's report dated the 22nd of March 2018. I say this as the background provided in tonight's papers only skims the surface of concerns. On page 5 of tonight's report, you will all note that there are extensive CS policies cited for why this proposal should be approved. However, when examined in detail, many of these issues seem to conflict with many of the substantial issues discussed tonight. For instance, in relation to CS2, the policy cites how development should respect and enhance the character of the area, having regard to scale, massing, height, etc. Most of the scheme proposed tonight appears to suggest that Shepshed's current skyline predominantly accommodates buildings of 2.5 and 3-storey dwellings, which is a fallacy, particularly in this area. There is one dwelling type that fits this description on the opposite side of the road, and whilst that is set back from the roadside, you can still see it towering over its neighbouring homes. Imagine a development with that en masse, perhaps better suited to a Nottingham or a Sheffield, but not so much in a rural location. This also ties in with CS11, which highlights landscape and countryside as its key themes. Policy CS13 and CS14 discusses biodiversity, geodiversity and heritage. This site is home to a lovely hedgerow, which year on year acts as a safeguard to passing wildlife. My fears from other developments in the community is that this soon could be taken away and add further strain to the impact of the biodiversity issues on site. This site is still by proportion going to have a big biodiversity loss, and while slightly mitigated by a buffer, will surely only be a moot point in an otherwise drastic change to the landscape. Network and sustainable development are all alluded to in policies CS16 to CS25 in one way or another, and again, I do question the validity of that argument when you take in the wider context. For example, this will be situated off an extremely busy commuter road to northwest Leicestershire and in the other direction towards the A512. The nearest amenities are further than an average walkaway, and therefore, to access the local supermarkets, you need to get there by car. That is not even to begin consideration of the demand placed on emergency services. The increased carbon footprint that this development could invariably create, again, makes CS13 and CS14 dubious points too. Policies C2 and EV/1 seem to completely disregard fears set out by residents and ones which I have also presented in respect of natural character of the site. Most homes in and around Iveshead Road are bespoke in design and of a similar scale. This larger development will become known as the first site to many when approaching Shepshed. Aesthetically, it does not appear to marry into the nearby neighbouring street scene, and these points are always contested as necessary entities. In our training as members, we are encouraged to refer to design policies continuously, and therefore this does somewhat raise questions regarding how this policy is best being utilised in this instance. I also have grave reservations as to how this scheme truly fits in with the ideals of the MPPF Section 12 and Section 14. In relation to the latter, this area is well known as being prone to flooding, as seen just last year when Severn Trent were made aware of strains on the local sewage. On site, this will surely be further burdened if we have heavy rainfall. Regarding the former, and again, it seems to conflict with our own policies on design, given the quota of prospective 2.5 and 3 story
1 minute
dwellings.
remaining.
Needless to say, I have grave reservations about what is being put forward on the table this evening. Over time, from the inspectorate downward, there have been a number of concerns raised regarding sustainability of this particular site. Therefore, I ask colleagues to consider refusing this application today in light of what has been heard this evening. Thank you again for all your time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marshall, there's been a lot said. Would you like to come back and comment?
If I may, please. Thank you, Vice Chair. There were quite a lot of points in there, so most of which is covered in the report. So there are a few sort of key points that I want to pick up on. The key issue of sustainability, obviously, Shepshed is one of our most sustainable settlements, and a previous appeal inspector has determined that the site is sustainable. So, you know, I think it would be completely unjustified and unreasonable for members to arrive at a different view on that. The drainage concerns raised about obviously existing drainage issues. Now, there is a condition that will require a detailed drainage scheme to be submitted and approved. The LLFA hasn't objected to the application, and actually I think it's recognised that the provision of an attenuation basin will actually improve the existing drainage situation, because rather than surface water running down the hill and into the gardens of adjacent properties, it will actually be retained on site within the attenuation basin. There was also obviously concerns raised about the layout and how that impacts on neighbouring properties. It might be worth me just resharing the layout just to sort of illustrate my point. Just bear with me. So yes, one moment. So yeah, this is the layout. Obviously, Mr. Beer raised concerns about impact on properties within the pastures and Iveshead Road. Obviously, existing properties along Iveshead Road do have long gardens. There is a sizable landscape buffer here. Properties are side-on. Where they're not side-on, they're back-to-back, but those back-to-back distances exceed the distances required by the design SPD, which is 21 metres. Obviously, these two properties here are bungalows. The pastures are 1.5-storey properties, but in addition to the fact that they're bungalows, there's also a landscape, a smaller landscape buffer there as well. So I think in terms of impact on existing residents, I think the scheme addresses any concerns raised. And obviously, the key issue, I think, for objectors and local residents and also councillors is the proposed heights of some of the buildings. Now, yes, there are 2.5-storey properties proposed, and some of those, I mean, they are interspersed throughout the site, but they are kept away from site boundaries where possible. So the ones on the site boundaries are two stories, and then we've got a row of 2.5 stories there and there. But that is not substantially different to what was granted previously by it wasn't. The previous appeal was dismissed, but it wasn't dismissed on the grounds of the heights of the buildings. It might be worth me just showing you the layout previously, which was considered by an inspector. As I said, the appeal was dismissed on other grounds, but there are 2.5-storey properties here and here, which are in very similar locations to that which is now proposed. And as I've said, the inspector didn't find an issue with that. So I think it would be unreasonable and unjustified for officers or members to arrive at a different view than a previous inspector. I think that's everything. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. So I throw it open to the meeting. At the moment, I don't see any hands up. Who's going to be first? Councillor Charles, would you like to go first, followed by Councillor Forrest, and then Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Is the landscape buffer that's been mentioned, has that been conditioned into the application, please?
Through you, Vice Chair. Yes, obviously the drawings condition obviously sets out or defines the layout. So obviously the development would need to be carried out in accordance with the approved details. So the positioning and the depths of the landscape buffers is defined and enforceable via condition. But obviously, in addition to that, there is a landscaping condition proposed, which is condition 4, as set out in the report. So the exact specification of the planting within that landscaping buffer is still up for discussion, but obviously that will be determined at a later date.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Councillor Charles, do you want to come back on that at all? No, okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. I would like some clarification, please, about the situation with the schools in Shepshed. And I would like to refer to page 19 and 20. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
I can hear you fine. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like some clarification about the situation with the schools, and I'm referring particularly to page 19 and 20. It says on page 19, improvements to the capacity in primary and secondary education within Shepshed, where there would be a deficit of pupil places following the development, and primary school and places in Shepshed must be pretty critical by now. And I know the amount given is £500,000, £504,000. But I wonder, between 4 primary schools and one secondary school, how far that will go. And is it possible for Mr. Marshall to tell us how that money will be spent across those schools, 5 schools, and whether that will be enough, because pupil deficit at one time would have been enough for us to refuse permission. I know we're not in that situation now, but I would like to be reassured about the capacity of those schools in Shepshed to take more pupils, please.
Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor Forrest. In terms of where that contribution would be spent, obviously the County Council, the local education authority who we consult as part of the application, they haven't objected to the application. However, they have identified that in order to meet the needs of the additional population created by the development, there will need to be expansion and enhancement at existing schools within Shepshed. And obviously, there are a number of schools that fall within the catchment. Now, how exactly that will be spent, we don't know at this time, but we know where it will be spent. It may be that each of those 5 schools gets a proportion of that money, or it may be that 2 schools share it, but it's for the County Council as a local education authority to decide exactly how that money is being spent.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Before I go to the next councillor, can I call on Mrs. Jackson to come in, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on that point. Whilst we don't know exactly how it's going to be spent, we do know the split, how much is needed in primary school and how much is needed in secondary school. And that's just set out on page 10 of the report. So I thought Councillor Forrest might find that useful. But it's pretty much half and half. just slightly more, £50,000 more for primary school, but it's split pretty evenly between primary school and secondary school.
Thank you.
May I just come back, Vice Chair?
Yes, certainly.
Can I ask, has the developer accepted this sum of money? Is it still in negotiation, or has it been clearly accepted?
Thank you for that, Councillor Forrest. Can I ask Mr. Marshall to come back on that?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, the heads of terms or the basic sums have been agreed by the developer, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Next up, I've got Councillor Campbell, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Regarding the buffer zones, you said that the plantings have got to be sorted. So obviously you want low-growing shrubs, you know, but would they be native? And also, who's going to manage them, you know, eventually? And also, a lot of the objectors mentioned about an old hedgerow and oak trees going through the site. Can these be protected, please?
Mr. Marshall, would you like to come back on that, please?
Yeah, obviously, in terms of the sort of species of landscaping, yes, that is still to be determined. There is obviously condition for a landscaping condition. Should council want to, he can propose to include an informative which suggests that the landscaping shall be native. Obviously, I'll leave that to him. In terms of the management of the landscaping in the open space, it is envisaged that it will be managed by a management company, but the management is to be determined through a landscaping management plan, which again is subject to conditions as set out in the report. In terms of the existing trees and hedgerows that run through the site, they are largely to be retained. In terms of protection via TPO, obviously the council's landscape officer has been consulted. She hasn't judged that it's necessary to serve a TPO on those particular trees at the current time. Obviously they're shown on the approved plans, or what will potentially be the approved plans, to be retained. And again, through the landscape management plan, we can obviously define exactly how they're going to be retained and managed in the long term. And again, obviously during construction as well, there is a tree protection plan as well. So I think in answering Councillor Campbell's question, I don't think it's necessary to serve a TPO, as the trees can be sort of obviously retained and protected by the means.
Okay, that sounds great. But I would like to ask for native planting to mimic the Charnwood Forest sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. Well, when somebody makes a proposition, we can ask the proposer or the seconder to include an informative on native planting. Next, I have Councillor Ransom.
Thank you, Vice Chair. It's just two comments. One is on page 12. I see from 2014 the dwellings were 103. We're now dropped down to 62, which is quite good, really. It's a 67 altogether, which in actual fact is the dwellings and the actually conditions and that of 106 money seems to be hasn't changed very much. The other thing I would like to ask Mr. Lewis Marshall is on page 13, is the site location. It says define settlement limits. Does that mean it's outside? It says outside of the defined settlement limits. Does that mean outside the limits of development? It's just a query I've got. That's all.
Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, just to clarify with members, it's a slightly confusing point, but in terms of the site history, where it says the site for the erection of 103 dwellings, now the applicant applied for 103, but on appeal, as it is within the gift of the inspector, the number was actually reduced to 77. So that may explain the sort of similarities between contributions previously and those being secured or proposed now. In terms of the limits to development, yes, the site is outside of but adjacent to the limits to development. Now, obviously, the policy that defines the limits to development is is an old Save Local Plan policy from 2004. It carries obviously much reduced weight. But I think that the key point for members to pick up on in terms of considering the fact that it's outside but adjacent to the limits is policy CS1, which obviously is a more up-to-date policy. It carries more weight, and that does allow for or at least 1,200 homes within or adjacent to Shepshed.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Next we have Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask quickly about the housing mix and the citing of the affordable housing, because these were points that a couple of the speakers raised, and I don't think the planning officers have actually mentioned yet. So I just wanted to ask if they could respond on those points. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Marshall again, would you like to come back on that, please?
Yes, I will do. Right, it might be worth me just sharing the layout plan again. The reason I didn't pick up on it when it was mentioned by speakers was I covered it within the report. Sorry, within the presentation. Right, so if members can see that. So there are sort of two areas of affordable housing, but they are all within the south western corner of the site. So we've got a group of 4 here, including a bungalow, which is accessed from this private drive. And then we've got another group here, which is accessed by this private drive, but they are interspersed with open market dwellings as well. So they're not all vanished and contained within one particular area. But crucially, the housing SPD seeks to ensure that there are groups of no more than 10, which there wouldn't be here. There's a group of 4 and a group of 9, which again is sort of split into subgroups. So in terms of the housing SPD and the distribution of affordable housing, it accords with our SPD. And obviously, in terms of the housing mix, that is set out in the report. It is broadly compliant with HEDNA. Obviously, HEDNA is not the determinative factor when we're considering housing mix. It is just one consideration. We also have to have regard for the character of the area. And obviously, if we were looking at more 2 and 3 bedroom houses, we'd be looking at more units and possibly higher density. So I think officers' view is that the scheme we have before members in terms of the mix is acceptable on those grounds.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't actually see any other hands up at the moment. Any other councillor? No. Is anybody in a position yet where they'd like to make a proposal? Councillor Fryer.
Sorry, Chair, I've lost my Vice Chair, I've lost my hand raising facility somewhere along the line. If I can find it again. Yes, I would like to propose that this is we accept officer's recommendation with the addition of an informative regarding the planting of native trees and shrubs.
Thank you.
And sorry, Chair, just for clarification, just to make sure there's no confusion, I think the recommendation is in 2 parts, Part A and Part B. Part A refers to the 106 or the monies, and the other one is the conditions further on. So it would be subject to, it is a recommendation A and B with an informative on the planting of native trees and shrubs.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Does that have a seconder?
Chair, I'd like to second that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Capleton. Thank you very much. Nobody else is indicating to speak, so I'm going to put that to the vote. It'll be a named vote. I'll call out everybody's names in alphabetical order. So if you'd like to vote for, against, or abstain. So first up, Councillor Campsell.
For, Chair.
Councillor Capleton.
For, Chair.
Councillor Charles.
For, Chair.
Councillor Forrest.
For, Chair.
Councillor Fryer.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Howe.
For, Chair.
Councillor Lowe.
For, Chair.
Councillor Ransom.
For, Chair.
Councillor Savage didn't take part, nor did Councillor Tassel. Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. For.
Councillor Ward.
For, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm also for. So I'll just check with Catherine Harrison, but I believe that was 11 for, no against, no abstentions. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Agreed. 11 for, no against, no abstentions, and 2 councillors didn't take part in this item.
Okay, thank you. So that item is passed. I'm now going to pass the meeting back to Councillor Fryer, who's going to chair the rest of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Right, we move on to page 32 in our agenda items, and there is an extras report with this one, which is planning application number 2, which is P20/2044/2, the land off East Road, Wymeswold. We have not have any declarations of interest on this, so we'll now have the presentation by the officer, and I'd like to welcome, excuse me, Miss Louise Winson, who is presenting to us for the first time tonight. So I'm sure we'll give her we'll be very kind to her. Miss Winson.
Thank you, Chair. If you members just give me a moment just to get these.
Don't worry, just
presentation.
Sort yourselves out and get everything. It's quite a complicated procedure.
I think, is that working for everybody now? I think so. Right, so item 2.
We haven't got, sorry, Louise, we haven't got your presentation up yet.
Oh, just bear with me a second.
That's all right. Maybe
there we go.
Someone else can help. One of the officers can assist. There we are.
Is that working now?
It's just
Sorry.
starting. There you are.
There we
We're
go.
fine now.
So,
thank you.
That's great. So item 2, apologies for the delay, is an outline application for the erection of 45 new dwellings with all matters reserved except the access point at land north of East Road in Wymeswold. The site is situated on the eastern side of Wymeswold, adjacent to the defined limits to development of the village. The application site itself is outlined in red and is formed of one larger parcel of land and a smaller, more linear parcel of land to the eastern side. Just to provide members with some context, the blue land shown on this plan is not part of the application site itself, but it is land within the applicant's control. The satellite view you can see here, and this is the main parcel of this site here, if you're able to see the cursor, is for, which shows the context view of the site on the satellite, and you can see how it would fit in with the wider village area. To the south, we have the main A6006 East Road that runs through Wymeswold, and the dwellings along Manor Court and Orchard Way are situated directly opposite to the south of East Road. And then directly between the southern side of the site and the A6006, we've got the existing Wymeswold allotment site. To To the north and east, we've got existing agricultural land, and then directly to the west, we've got the Homeleys Way and Waydale development, which was the Taylor Wimpey development from some years ago off Wysall Lane. And then we have some existing neighbouring properties along East Road here. The site, other than the northern boundary of this small linear parcel, is bounded by mature trees and hedging, and the land levels do rise gradually in a northerly direction from the A6006. This photograph is taken from the southern end of the site and shows views towards the north, where you can see that northern boundary. And here we have views to the western boundary, where members will be able to get an idea of how the land levels do rise at the site. Here you can see the rooftops of the properties along Homeleys Way and Waydale. And this is the actual nearest neighbouring property to the site at number 21A East Road. This here is taken from a similar place at the bottom of the site, but looks east, and this is where the linear parcel of land would be situated, in this area here. And then just in the distance, you can see number 65 East Road, which is shown here, just the other side of the Blue Land area. This photograph is taken from opposite the site, looking towards Wineswold in that direction. Here it's approximately the location for the new access going into the site along here. And again, this is a similar view, but taken in the opposite direction, heading out of the village. And again, the approximate location for the access into the site would be here. We've got an existing pedestrian refuge in the highway at this point, and there are improvements to that refuge proposed as part of the development. The last few photographs are really taken to give members an idea of the context of the surrounding sites. To the very north of the application site, there is a public footpath which you can walk along and look down towards the site in a southerly direction. And here you can, from this point, you can see how the landscape dips for the village. And here, again, you can see the tops of the properties along the top of Wysall Lane and along the top of the Homeleys Way and Waydale development. And this is just further along that footpath, and this is where just below behind this hedgerow, a little bit further on, would be where the actual houses would sit. Again, this photograph is taken on the opposite side of the site, just to provide members with a little bit more context. This parcel of land here would be where the application site is, where the application would be, and where the dwellings would be situated. And this land here is the allotment site as well. Again, this is taken from Orchard Way, facing directly onto the main parcel of land. So again, across here, we've got the allotment site, and then directly behind this is where the dwellings would actually sit. And then finally, just to provide a little bit more context, it is the street scene opposite to the site. So you've got the properties along Manor Court and Orchard Way here. So the proposal in front of members tonight is for an outline application for 45 dwellings with all access reserved, with all matters reserved, rather than access at this time. The application has been supported by an illustrative layout plan, which shows how the site could be laid out. The access into the site would be via this small parcel of land here, further to the east, and that is what members are considering tonight. It's suggested that the dwellings could be set out around a circular highway arrangement with sort of the main road and private drives accessing off that. There is also provision within the site for attenuation ponds and play area facilities and green space. So going to the main issues in the consideration of the application, obviously we've got the principal and housing mix. As members are aware, Charnwood at the present time cannot currently demonstrate the required 5-year supply of housing land and can only provide 4.1 years at the present time. And this means that the development plan policies directly related to the supply of housing in this area are out of date, meaning that the weight assigned to them in the planning balance is reduced. The shortfall in housing land supply triggers paragraph H11D of the National Planning Policy Framework, and this paragraph sets out the presumption in favour of sustainable development unless there are any adverse impacts caused by the proposal that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The consideration of this application will therefore involve a tilted balance judgment. The location of the developments outside of any defined limits is a negative impact in the planning balance. However, as the weight afforded to the relevant policies assigned to the supply of housing is reduced, the degree of harm caused must also be reduced. The provision of 45 dwellings at a time where there is an acute housing need in the borough is a benefit to the scheme, which is considered to carry significant weight. Of the 45 dwellings, there is provision made for 40% of them to be affordable home, which complies with policy CS3. And this again is considered to be a benefit in the planning balance. With regards to access and highway safety, as I've said before, the access into the site is for approval at this stage. The Highway Authority have been consulted and reviewed all the data submitted with the application. Submitted plans make provision for the required visibility displays and radii at the junction, as well as footpaths on both sides of the carriageway. Provision is also made for the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit to be moved further to the east, along with new gateway signage. At the moment, the 30-mile-an-hour restriction starts at approximately the same area as the access. Proposed access point, but this will be moving further east, approximately here, and the new gateway signage proposed further up the site is shown on this plan underneath here. There are also improvements to the existing pedestrian refuge proposed just adjacent to the access to make that more user-friendly. And the application also makes provision for a zebra crossing along East Road, which the Highway Authority consider to be necessary in this instance as a result of the development. The exact location and details of this crossing are, however, proposed to be secured via the additional condition as set out in the extras report. The application is also supported by a junction capacity and trip generation data, which the Highway Authority have reviewed and have made no objections to. It's considered that the junction can operate without significant queuing or delay. With regards to sustainability, the improvements to the footpaths along the carriageway will improve links within the links to the village, and contributions towards the nearby bus stops, towards improvements to the nearby bus stops, along with bus passes and travel packs for the new residents can also be secured in compliance with policy CS17. This also weighs in favour of the proposal. So overall, the improvements to the highway network have been considered by the Highway Authority, and they are considered to be acceptable, and that they will not have an unacceptable impact on the highway network. This is considered to weigh in favour of the scheme. Moving on to design, layout and landscape, the specific design and layout is something that would be reserved for the reserved matters application and is not for approval at this stage. However, how the site could be laid out has been shown on the submitted illustrative layout. It is the view of the officers that a good quality design and layout for the scheme could be provided at the reserved matters stage, which met with the design aspirations as set out in the development plan. This also goes for the aspirations set out in the development plan for the impact on residential amenity, as well for the existing properties around. This has some positive benefit in the planning balance. With regards to the landscape impact, the loss of an open field in the countryside would weigh negatively in the planning balance. However, given the relationship of the site with the village, it is considered that the development will read as an extension to the village rather than an isolated development in the countryside. The impact of this is therefore considered to be localised. The hedgerows around the site will be retained, which would allow elements of the existing landscape vernacular to be preserved and provide some screening for the development. The provision of dwellings on the site is not considered to significantly alter the Wineswold Bowl landscape. Views of the development from the wider landscape will be minimal due to the site sitting within the lower land levels of the landscape bowl. To ensure the development doesn't interrupt the individual landscape, it is recommended that the extra condition set out in the extras report is imposed. This condition will restrict the height of the dwellings to protect the ridgeline to the north of the site and consequently the bowl landscape. The provision of additional landscaping on the site at the reserve matter stage will also help to assimilate the development into its surroundings. These factors are considered to weigh in favour of the development and mitigate the localised harm caused by the loss of the greenfield on the edge of the village. With regards to the impact on infrastructure, the contribution set out on pages 52 to 53, along with the additional contribution set out in the extras report, are considered to be still compliant and necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms. We have a libraries contribution, education contribution, open space, affordable housing, NHS contribution, sustainable transport, highway safety and ecology contribution. These are all directly related to the scale of the development and have been agreed by the developer. With regards to other matters, with drainage, the site is in flood zone 1 and the application is supported by a flood risk assessment. The drainage proposals seek to discharge to an on-site attenuation basins, attenuation basins before being discharged into an on-site ditch. The local lead flood authority has reviewed the submitted drainage information and is satisfied with the proposals in principle, subject to conditions 18, 19, 21 and 20, 18, 19, 20 and 21. The proposal is therefore considered to comply with policy CS16 and the framework in this regard. Moving on to ecology, the submitted ecological appraisal indicates there are no protected species at the site. However, there could be some impact on foraging species and bats, which use the existing land and hedgerows as a wildlife corridor. Whilst ecological enhancement measures are proposed as part of the outline, it is officers' opinion that further mitigation would be required to ensure the development results in no net loss to biodiversity. This could be secured by the submission of an ecological mitigation strategy to form part of the legal agreement as set out in recommendation A. If necessary, the blue land could be used as well to provide the appropriate level of mitigation. With regards to heritage and archaeology, the edge of the adopted Wineswold Conservation Area is situated adjacent to the southwestern corner of the site, with the nearest listed building being Wineswold Hall, which is approximately 69 metres to the south. The site itself does not form part of any key views to or from these nearby heritage assets, and it is considered by officers that a future reserve matters application could be designed to ensure there will be no harm to these heritage assets. This would have a neutral impact in the balance of the scheme. With regards to archaeology, the development would result in loss of a part of the ridge and furrow landscape. However, a condition is recommended on page 56 of the agenda to ensure items of archaeological interest are recorded and preserved. This will mitigate any impact caused. Sorry, just moving on to soils. It's acknowledged that the proposal would result in the loss of a greenfield site, that is a loss of a greenfield site which could be used for agriculture. However, it is a relatively small area and it doesn't make a significant contribution to agricultural production at the present time. The site is also classed as grade 3B agricultural land, which is not the best and most versatile land. The scheme is therefore considered to comply with the relevant provisions of Policy 16, which seek to protect the best and most versatile agricultural land. So with regards to the planning balance in the consideration of this application, the application has been assessed against the policies contained within the development plan, along with the comments and consultee responses received. The application would contribute 45 new dwellings to the borough's land supply at a time of critical need. 40% of these would be affordable homes. Given the current lack of 5-year housing supply in the borough, this should be given significant weight in the planning balance. The scheme would provide open space and green infrastructure, which would have a social benefit. This would carry limited positive weight. The scheme would also provide jobs during the construction process, and also the new residents would support the local economy once the development was complete. This would have some limited positive benefit in the balance of the scheme. The appearance and layout can be appropriately designed in a future reserved matters application to ensure that there is no significant harm to visual amenity, residential amenity, heritage, or ecology. These factors are considered to have a neutral impact in the planning balance. The provision of improvements to the footways, bus stops and crossing points over East Road is considered to carry some positive weight. Negatively, the development would result in the loss of a greenfield site used for agriculture. However, the policies which seek to protect the provision of countryside in this area carry a reduced weight at this time. There will be some localised impact on the landscape in the immediate locality. However, it is considered that the bowl landscape can be retained through careful design at the future reserve matters stage, and the provision of additional planting at this stage, along with the retention of the existing hedgerows, is considered to mitigate the impact on the landscape in the long term. So overall, on balance, it is considered that the harms identified do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the additional housing at this time of critical housing need in the borough. And for that reason, it is recommended that planning permission is granted in association with the provisions of recommendations A and B in your agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And we now have 4 speakers. We have Mr. Brian McKean as an objector. We have, on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Guy Longley, and we have a representative, Miss Ling, from the Parish Council. It was a late request to speak, but it has been put forward to the committee, and the committee have agreed that on this occasion, Miss Ling can address the committee. And we have the ward councillor, Councillor Jenny Boker. So just to remind all speakers that you have 5 minutes, and it will be indicated to you by Mr. Brown after 4 minutes that you have down to your last minute. If you carry on after the 5 minutes, you will be muted. So Mr. McKean, there we are. When you're ready, please start.
Okay. Good evening, councillors. With regards to this application, I want to focus in on the flood risk assessment. The site flood risk assessment was drawn up in 2017. It proposes to discharge excess water from 2 suds ponds to an existing watercourse which runs down a hill under 9 Manor Court into the gardens of Pagetcroft and the River Mantle. The planning officers comment that the recommendation that recent flood reports were mainly due to extreme rainfall events is anecdotal and appears not to be qualified by any evidence, and it misrepresents the major concerns the village have over flood risk. Since the FRA was created, a serious flood has occurred along this very watercourse. Severe damage to the properties, including internal flooding to the houses, resulted in expensive and extensive investigation by the insurers. It was discovered that the residents of Pagetcroft have remodelled the watercourse, reducing its capacity to less than 25%. Expert witnesses engaged by the current insurance claim people have confirmed that the evening's flood rain was no more than a 1 in 4 year event, and they calculate now that the watercourse capacity is as low as 1 in 25 years because of these alterations. This equates to a flood risk zone 3 level. Thus, the data from the FRA is based on outdated local detailed information. The CBC enforcement team investigated the watercourse alterations in August 2020 and reported back that they are now time barred from enforcement action to put the watercourse back into its correct state. The LLFA have also confirmed that they have not conducted a detailed assessment of this post-flood. The developer proposes to build a SUDS pond using the guidance of the Syria 697 standard. Section 2.2.9 states that any excess water should not be allowed to exacerbate a flood risk. The FRA also assumes that the watercourse is in zone 1, which we now believe, because of this evidence, is incorrect. The FRA reports additional excess water dispersal will be done by using the roadside ditch referred to in the presentation. This finishes at a lay-by directly opposite Manor Court. The FRA states that the water flows from west to east. However, west to east is uphill, rising out of the village. Because of this, the excess water will not go into the watercourse and will flow directly down into Manor Court to the end of that, where there is no means of escape, thus exacerbating the flood risk. Where excess water is proposed to discharge into the watercourse, this will have to pass through a culvert downstream approximately 60 metres away from the site, where it will be choked again and exacerbate flood risk. You should be aware that Syria 697, section 3.2.4 states that if a significant change has occurred, then a detailed downstream analysis is required before a SUDS can be used. Section 2.2.9 also refers to the Association of British Insurers interested in ensuring that no increased flood risk occurs because of the use of a SUDS. When proposing the use of a SUDS, the Syria, the applicant must also consider other planning applications that are in progress, P/20/1751/2 and P/2024/27/2 are currently both live applications, are in close proximity to this applicant and use the same watercourse as their means of dispersal. As
1 minute remaining.
As such, you are required to do a master drainage policy, and this has not been done. Finally, as disclosed in the FRA, the developer proposes to build that SUDS with a capacity of 640 cubic metres. It is located at the highest point of the village and not at the lower levels. The no risk assessment has been described in the report to address the consequences of failure of the embankment of the SUDS. If it fails, a large volume of water will fall down the hill at high speed into Manor Court, causing extreme damage and potential risk of life. It is noticeable that most SUDS that I have seen in the local area are on low-level plains, flat areas, and not sited above properties. I would therefore urge you to consider carefully the consequences of making such a decision to approve this without the necessary detailed risk assessments and the knowledge that a significant problem exists currently within this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKean. Ms. Ransom, that was quite a technical address to us all. Did you want to come back on that now, or would you prefer to wait till the other three speakers have spoken?
I'll just come back now, Chair, if that's okay, just to confirm also, to members that
yes, because it was really quite technical. Also, if you could at some time, or someone could during the next few minutes clarify, the speaker did mention that there were 2 live applications. Does that mean they're in the process of being built, or they're waiting to go through the approval system? So thank you very much, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm with regards to the drainage, the local lead flood authority has reviewed the data submitted with the outline application and is satisfied at the moment that they're satisfied with the details submitted, that there won't be an issue with having dwellings on the site in principle. Obviously, this is at the outline stage and full drainage details will be required to be submitted at the reserve matters stage as set out in the recommended conditions. So if the future is a matter stage, there will be that level of additional technical information that will need to be submitted, which the lead local flood authority will again review and determine whether they are acceptable for the provision of dwellings on that land. But at the moment, we are dealing with it very much in principle, and in principle, the lead local flood authority, as the drainage experts, are satisfied that the site can be adequately drained. Just to confirm with regards to the other applications that the speaker mentioned, they are in the process of being considered by the local planning authority at the moment.
So do I take that no decision has been made on them yet? Thank you very much.
No, that's correct, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
So we are only looking at this application. Other applications which may or may not be approved, do not come in front of us tonight. Right, I now have Mr. Guy Longley, who's the agent on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Longley is he with us, Mr. Brown? Yes.
He's just joining now.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Longley. You have, as you understand, 5 minutes, and it will be indicated to you when you have 1 minute left. So when you're ready, please begin.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. The officer report clearly sets out the planning position in relation to the proposals and deals comprehensively with the various representations made. I would offer the following comments from the developer's perspective. As the officer report sets out, the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing with a shortfall in excess of 1,000 homes. And as a result, the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies, and proposals for housing should be approved unless any adverse impacts would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. This is not just a matter of numbers. It is a housing crisis affecting real people and their life chances due to the lack of access to decent housing. The lack of good quality affordable housing, forcing families to live in substandard privately rented accommodation, is a particular problem. There are no objections to the proposals from the statutory consultees. The Highway Authority has no objections to the proposed access to the site from East Road. The Environment Agency and the Lead Local Flood Authority do not object to the drainage proposals for the site. Council officers raise no objections in relation to heritage or landscape impacts of the scheme. On the other hand, the benefits of the proposals are clear. The development will provide much needed housing to help address the critical housing supply shortfall in the borough in what is one of the more sustainable larger villages. Wymanswold is a vibrant community with a range of local services providing for the needs of local residents, including a local shop, public houses, and a village hall and recreation facilities benefiting from the good management provided by the parish council. There's also a primary school, local pharmacy, and nearby employment, and bus services providing connections to Loughborough and Melton Mowbray. The provision of 40% affordable housing on the site is a key benefit of the proposals, delivering some 20 new affordable homes. In consultation with the local community and the parish council, the need for a pedestrian crossing was identified as a key local issue. The scheme includes proposals for a controlled pedestrian crossing on East Road that will make it much safer for pedestrians, and in particular school children catching school buses, to cross the road. The Highway Authority, having undertaken its own assessment, confirms that a crossing is required and can be secured by condition. The proposals include new areas of open space on site, along with contributions to improve existing children's recreation provision in the village, including enhancing facilities at the play area behind the village hall, and a contribution to improve the East Road allotments that could provide water and power for the allotment users. We agree with officers that these benefits clearly outweigh any harm. The previous speaker has raised specific concerns about potential surface water risks to properties south of East Road. As I've already mentioned, the Lead Local Flood Authority has raised no objections to the proposed drainage strategy, which controls surface water flows from the site with stormwater balancing ponds, with discharge then to a nearby watercourse. This has been further investigated and confirmed using CCTV surveying and provides a robust drainage strategy for the site. The proposals will not increase surface water flows and will in fact provide a benefit, especially in extreme events, in controlling runoff from the site through the balancing ponds. As your officer has indicated, suggested conditions provide the comfort that further details of the drainage strategy will need to be approved by the council as part of any detailed proposals. The master plan proposals will provide a high quality development. Members and the parish council should be assured that, as a company, Davidson's has a commitment to ensuring high quality new developments on its sites, and its involvement in this site will deliver a high quality scheme. They have a particular expertise in developing residential schemes in smaller villages and are rated as a 5-star builder in the HBF NHBC Customer Satisfaction Survey. Davidson's are committed to bringing forward the development at the earliest opportunity and are keen to continue the dialogue with the council and the local community in relation to the
1 minute remaining.
In relation to the details required to be provided by the proposed conditions through the construction phase. As part of this, they would be happy to commit to the submission of a draft Section 106 agreement quickly following a resolution to grant permission. We would therefore urge members to approve the applications subject to conditions in a Section 106 agreement in accordance with the officer recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now go to Ms. Ling on behalf of Wymesville Parish Council.
Sorry, bear with me, Chair. Just going to bring her in.
Okay.
She should be in now.
Can you put your microphone on, please, Ms. Ling?
Apologies.
That's okay. As previously stated, you have 5 minutes and it will be indicated to you when you have 1 minute left. So when you're ready, please start.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. This application fails to address the two main reasons given for refusing earlier applications. It does not promote sustainable travel and it would dramatically affect the landscape and setting of Wymeswold. It would appear to have been submitted again because of new government guidance that applications should be approved if sustainable, even if they are not in accordance with a local plan and where there is a shortfall against the housing target. I would like to draw the committee's attention to the recent Court of Appeal Gladman versus Secretary of State for Housing. The judges in this case found that even where there is a lack of 5-year housing supply, the local plan remains relevant to the application decisions. The Gladman judgment, issued the 3rd of February this year, considered two similar applications with clear parallels to this application. It contains important messages on current planning policy and its interpretation is highly relevant to this application. 3 judges ruled that whilst a shortage of housing supply is a consideration, it does not mean that local policies can simply be overridden. Last month, the Parish Council conducted a survey. Out of a current 615 houses in the village, over a third of households responded. From the results of the survey, we know that the majority, 37% of the working population of the village, ordinarily work in Nottingham. 15% work in Leicester and 5% in Derby. All use their cars because we don't have a bus service to these employment centres. Only 6 respondents said they actually worked in Wymeswold itself. The Parish Council can evidence that Wymeswold residents predominantly use their cars because the bus service is inadequate and doesn't even access the service centres of Barrow-upon-Soar and Eastleek. From past experience, we know that housing built remotely from the village centre encourages car journeys. The estate off Weissel Lane mentioned earlier, built approximately 13 years ago, is a good example of this. The majority of residents living on the Weissel Lane estate, which are family homes, use their cars to access the village primary school because it is too far to walk and because the main road which they need to cross is exceptionally busy and dangerous. In turn, 81% of residents responding to the recent survey stated that parking issues along Brook Street at drop-off and collection times for the school day was a problem because of these additional vehicular movements. We are also aware that parents of primary-aged children in the village increasingly drive their children to neighbouring villages for their education to stand a better chance of getting them into their preferred secondary school. Hence, the village primary school numbers have plummeted. On the grounds of sustainability, this application conflicts with planning policies CS1, CS17 and CS25. A similar development of 34 properties called Storkett Meadows at the opposite end of the village, but still north of the main road, has only just sold the remaining property 6 years after building commenced. A number of properties remained unsold until very recently, in particular the larger 4 and 5 bedroom houses. With regard to landscape and setting, the proposed site is in the open countryside and on rising ground. It would cause unacceptable harm to the area's intrinsic character and the appearance of the countryside. The existing hedges will not screen the development as described in the officer's report. The village design statement highlights the character of the development plans around the village.
1 minute remaining.
And states that the development should respect the views to and from the village boundary, which this application clearly does not. The fact that this is a ridge and furrow field is mentioned in the officer's report, but given minimal weight. By comparison, this was cited as grounds for refusal in 2015. Surely the ridge and furrow field should be considered as a heritage asset. In conclusion, whilst it is acknowledged that the Borough Council is not currently able to demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing, the Parish Council considers the cumulative detrimental impacts of the development to surely outweigh the benefits secured by additional supply of housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we now move to the Ward Councillor, Councillor Jenny Boker. Just give you time, Ed, to sort it out. Right. You're muted at the moment, Councillor Boker, but when you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes, and it'll be indicated after 4 minutes that you have 1 minute left. So whenever you're ready.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Right. Good evening, members. I apologise if some of this is repetitive, but I am trying to summarise all the points that have been made. So my question is, should Charnwood be allowing non-sustainable development to compensate for a lack of a 5-year supply of land? Charnwood's present inability to demonstrate a 5-year supply for housing is due largely to the failure of sustainable urban extensions delivering the plan completions anticipated in the adopted local plan. In these circumstances, the Council, as you've heard, is obliged to consider a presumption in favour of sustainable development outside the provisions of the plan. However, I consider that the proposed development is not sustainable and that the present application fails to address the reasons given for refusing an earlier application in 2018, which was 0081. And those reasons for refusal remain valid. It further fails to acknowledge or address specific objections from Rhymeswell Parish Councils and others to the previous application. So as you heard, the previous application was rejected on the grounds of unsustainability and a lack of infrastructure. Employment and access to essential services and facilities such as schools, secondary schools, healthcare, shops, etc., requires travel outside the village. There is limited access to public transport and it doesn't connect with Eastleigh or Barrow, where the nearest GP and dental services are located. It goes into Loughborough. There is concern that the service may be withdrawn, and it's difficult to believe that 45 new households will affect this debate. Accordingly, the reliance on private vehicles will increase, and this conflicts with planning policy CS 17. I consider that no new evidence has been provided to justify the need for this proposal to meet the housing requirements identified in the local plan. In terms of road safety issues on Reese Road, the Parish Council has concerns regarding safety with the site accessing the busy A6006 on East Road. Many village services such as the primary school shop and memorial hall are located south of this main road, requiring pedestrians to cross the busy road. In order to get to the village shop on foot, for example, anyone walking from the proposed site would need to cross the road on 3 occasions due to the lack of pavements at certain points. However, I do accept that the applicant proposes to improve pavements. When Leicestershire County Council conducted a traffic survey in 2014, it showed that over a 12-hour period, there were over 8,000 vehicles travelling along this section, of which 428 were HGVs. This obviously represents a major safety issue to pedestrians wishing to cross the road. The Parish Council feels that the proposed new development would only add to the safety concerns of pedestrians trying to access village services.
1 minute remaining.
All right. The proposal does include a zebra crossing. However, this is some distance from the site itself. However, the final position of this zebra crossing has yet to be decided by Highways. You've heard quite a lot of detail about the flooding, but I would emphasise as well, it's worth noting that there's been some legal challenges to this issue of building in unsustainable locations when there is no 5-year supply, and those challenges have been won, as Joe Ling indicated. And Gladman Development Limited versus Secretary of State is one such legal challenge, where the court reaffirmed that the provisions of the National Planning Policy Framework.
Well, time is up, I'm afraid. So it's 5 minutes have gone.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Right, Miss Winson, sorry, Louise, I didn't come back to you between the other speakers, so hopefully you can catch up with us now.
Chair, I'm going to pick some of these things up if that's
Yes,
okay.
if you'd like to take them up first, Mrs. Jackson, and then we'll go back to Louise as you see necessary.
Okay, so there was a lot in those last 2 speakers, so I do need to come back on them. First of all, we'll pick up on what Councillor Boker was saying when she ran out of time at the end, and that was about the legal challenges, particularly the Gladman case. Members just need to be aware of that. It's something that officers are already aware of. What that legal determination did was reaffirm the primacy of the development plan, and that is always what we do. So you will know in the report, the officer directs you to the fact that the development plan is the starting point for any decision making process, and that's what we do. We recognise that the development is contrary to the development plan, and we ascribe harm to that in the weighting of the plan and balance, particularly the fact that it's promoting housing in another settlement. However, we do not believe that that harm in being contrary to those development plan policies, given those policies are out of date as a result of the 5-year supply, would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And that's the test that members have to play with. You know, we're not saying they're irrelevant, we're saying they're relevant, and we're recognising the harm in going against that and what that means. but we don't feel that that harm is significant or demonstrable for all the reasons set out in the report. In terms of sustainability, it's a difficult one. It's one that members, you know, have considered on a number of sites whilst we've not had a 5-year supply. Unfortunately, without a 5-year supply, we don't have the benefit that we once did have when we had one in choosing where to put development. You know, we have to consider all development in line with the new weighting of the development plan. And in this particular circumstance, there are local services, there is a local school, there are bus services, albeit limited in the direction of Melton and Loughborough, but they do exist. The houses aren't isolated houses within the countryside, they are attached to the settlement and, you know, are nestled in quite well. And you know, my professional opinion is that it would be very difficult to sustain a reason for refusal on sustainability grounds. With regards to the new entrants and access, obviously we have consulted with the local highway authority, who are the experts on that matter, and they are content that the access would operate safely and it wouldn't be severe cumulative impact in line with para 109, which obviously paragraph 109 of the MPPF we've referred to on numerous occasions, and members have dealt with it in training as well. And with regards to access to services, it is recognised that this is on the north of East Road, and you do have to cross the road to access some services, particularly the primary school, and that's why this development secures a crossing. It's worth noting that the previous refusal reason back in 2018 did not include a crossing, and that wasn't a reason for refusal. However, given the current situation and a reassessment of the highway impacts, it is considered that that crossing can now be justified and we can secure it through the application. That's secured under condition 10 of the application. I think I've picked up all of those issues. I don't think there's anything I've missed, but I'm sure members will highlight it if there is anything I've missed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jackson. Has that covered all the points on your bit? Did you want to add anything, Louise?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add a little bit more information for members with regards to the sustainability side of the application. Obviously, Mrs. Jackson touched on the services that were available in the village itself, but the village also benefits from a pharmacy and a local shop as well, which supplies a limited amount of general day-to-day items. So with regards to how other settlements are set out in the core strategy, is that they do have 4 or more of the services and facilities which enable residents to go about their day-to-day lives and generally meet the needs of those day-to-day activities. And because of those provisions of those activities, facilities, Wymesall does have the 4 categories, which would mean that the residents could generally have access to them to meet their day-to-day needs. So it's not an unsustainable location as set out in the core strategy in any case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, I don't see any hands at the moment, so we're opening it up for people to ask questions or forward view. Councillor Tassell.
Thank you, Chair. I still haven't got my raised hand facility back, so I'll have to do this. But can I ask about the play areas and the open spaces on this development, please? On page 33, it states that there's going to be a children's play area proposed towards the south side, adjacent to the access road. I'm always very, very worried when they put children's play areas at the side of an access road or a public footpath where anyone can walk by, or they could run out into the road or something like that. And then it says 2 village green areas of open space are also shown. The areas of public open space could be overlooked to provide security to these areas. I presume that this is because of children again. I don't like the way that I didn't see the public open areas on the slide. I just did notice that the play areas was rather up in one corner, which always tends to be the thing, is to put in children's play areas away from houses, and I don't agree with it, I'm afraid. I'd just like clarification on exactly where these areas are, please.
Thank you. Ms. Winson, could you come back on this, please? Because also there was something to do with open spaces and leaps and laps in the extras report. So if you could carry that for that, because there was talk of a leap and then it's going to be a lap now. So, and also you may want to bring the slide up again to indicate. I thought now, and I agree with Councillor Tassel on this, that most children's play areas now should be, particularly if they're for younger children, should be overlooked to some extent, not just put away where no one can see what's going on. So just some clarification, if I may, please, if we may.
Thank you, Chair, through you. The public open space and the provision of play areas and that sort of thing, say, isn't for approval tonight. We are only dealing with the application outline stage. This specific location and design and layout of the public open spaces and the play areas and the amounts of them, that will come through as part of the reserve matters application. The with regards to the location of the play areas, obviously through the consideration of where they are going to be most appropriately sited, we will consult with our colleagues in open spaces and that sort of thing to make sure that they are the most appropriate and safe location on the site for them. And quite often as well, with play areas, they are fenced off to ensure that children can't run out into the highway or into other areas on safety grounds. So, as say, the illustrative layout that was shown was just to show that these features were going to be made provision for as part of the site. However, it's not for consideration tonight, the exact location of them. It is just an outline application. So they were just to show that they would be put on there as part of the scheme. Also, Chair mentioned about the proposed play area, whether it be a leap or a lap. The original report made reference to a leap area being provided on the site. However, following further consideration of that, given the scale of the site, it's been considered that a lap would be more appropriate on the site, and therefore the developers have agreed to make a contribution to provide off-site and to provide an off-site contribution to the provision or enhancement of play facilities in Wymeswood, and that's earmarked to go towards the work at the Memorial Park, which is going on in the village at the moment. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mrs. Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reassure members that whilst it's outlined and we're saying it's not for approval, obviously you want to know that these open space areas are going to be delivered if you approve the outline as part of the reserve matters. So I just wanted to point your attention to condition 8, which is actually amended in its wording in the extras report, and what that does is it secures the quantum of open space in the outline, so you can be assured that that is going to be provided, including the local area of play, which is the lab, so for young children's play space. So they are going to be secured. It's just not known right now. It'll be secured through condition 8, but the details will be part of the reserve matters.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands at the moment. Has anybody else got anything? Oh yes, I have now. I've got Councillor Forrest, Councillor Ransom and Councillor Savage. So Councillor Forrest. You're still muted. There you are.
I'm very sorry, Chair. You will have noticed a little while ago I was away from the screen. I want to make it clear that I was not away from hearing what I was not out of the room, and I heard all of Councillor Boker's presentation, and I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I had to do something similar a few minutes ago, a little while ago, when the dog needed to go out, and there's no one else here except me. But I could hear everything. Councillor Ransom.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to all the deliveries. The one thing that is actually quite admirable for this builder who is outlining planning is provision of pedestrian improvement for the village, which I think is very needed. If anybody knows Wymesole, it is a needed item in the village. It's also the fact is that it's one of the things that we've got to really accept. So I think really, in one sense, I like to propose acceptance outlining planning permission for this for items for pages on the A and B and on the extras report, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair, can I make sure that the condition of pedestrian that goes in first, that all the infrastructure is started if the committee is minded to pass all this?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Savage, Councillor Jackson. This is Jackson and then Councillor Savage.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that. Obviously, we can't justify everything goes in first, and the consultees have given us indication of when everything's needed. So the triggers in the 106, say for education, will be led by the Education Authority to make sure that those provisions are being delivered when they're needed. In terms of the crossing, like I said, that's pointed out in
39
committee. I'll start again. The crossing condition is condition 10. So yes, what that requires is that within 2 months of the commencement of the development, they need to be putting that scheme in for us to consider, so we know exactly what's going to happen and where. And then that approved scheme has to be fully implemented prior to any occupation of any dwelling on the site. So that's the crossing condition, condition 10.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Savage.
I'd like to say I can't see any adverse impact on this development at all. And I'd like to second Councillor Ransom's proposal.
Thank you. So that is, thank you very much. So that is for the proposal as laid out in recommendations A and B, plus those on the extras report. Now also on page, yes, so that includes, doesn't it, on page 3 of the extras report, that finally it was considered by officers as an extra condition restricting the heights of dwellings should be imposed. Jackie Jackson.
If Councillor Ransom is as I understand it, is minded to go with officer recommendation as set out in the reports and the extras reports, then that will include both the amendments to recommendation A for open space, the amendment to condition 8 on the open space, and also the additional condition about the heights of the buildings.
Councillor Ransom, is
yes,
that all right?
I'm happy with that, thank you.
And Councillor Savage as the seconder, is that all right?
Very happy with that, Chair.
Thank you. Now, I need a guidance here because we have someone else that wants to speak. Sorry, come back to you, Jackie Jackson. Then Councillor Campson wants to speak. Do we let him speak before we go on to the proposal? So, Jackie Jackson.
I was just going to highlight that Councillor Campbell wanted to speak, and it's, as far as I'm understand it, Chair, if you would like the debate to continue before taking the vote, then that is acceptable.
Thank you. Councillor Council.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Longley tells us we're 1,000 houses short. We've already passed some tonight. We passed some last week, a few hundred. So surely we're only a few hundred houses short. And I can't see 45 houses they want to build on lovely Wolds countryside. You know, I don't think it's worth losing the lovely bit of Wolds countryside just for 45 houses.
Well, so it's just that. Did you want to come back, Mrs. Jackson?
I can do if you want me to answer that question.
I mean, we're just looking at the application, not it's whether it is a sustainable, proper application. We take your point, Councillor Council, that you don't think the extra 45 but makes much difference, but it can make smaller developments are often better than 1,000 houses in one place or hundreds in one place. Mrs. Jackson, and then if I don't see any other speakers, we'll go to the vote.
I was just going to try and answer Councillor Council's question. I think you've pretty covered it, but I will go in there. As you know, we've got a 4.1 year supply of housing. That is an annual figure now going forward, although it was changed obviously in November when our core strategy became 5 years old. At that point, it was in the region of the numbers that Mr. Longley was setting out, and we haven't closed that gap as it stands. So we still have a shortage. I don't know the exact figure. The council will do its annual return shortly and we'll be able to update members. But as the critical figure of 5 years supply, we don't have one tonight as we're talking to you. In terms of the impact, Councillor Council is right. It will result in the loss of open countryside. And we have to consider that in the balance. Member officers have considered that, and we have, you know, identified that there will be the loss, so inevitable harm, and you know how that might be mitigated through additional landscaping. But in the balance, we don't think that that loss is significant and demonstrable, which is the two terms that we keep coming back to. But Councillor Council is right that, you know, all of these things do need to be considered.
Thank you. Right, I have no more hands, so we'll go to the vote. Councillor Bentley.
For, Chair.
Councillor Council.
Against, Chair.
You. Councillor Capleton.
For, Chair.
Councillor Charles.
For, Chair.
Councillor Forrest.
I abstain, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Howe.
For, Chair.
Councillor Lowe.
For, Chair.
Councillor Ransom.
For, Chair.
Councillor Savage.
For, Chair.
Councillor Tassell.
For, Chair.
Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. For.
And Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Against.
Thank you. And my own vote is for, so I make that waiting confirmation from Ms. Harrison. 10 for, 2 against, and 1 abstention.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree. It was carried with a vote of 10 for, 2 against, 1 abstention. That was carrying officer's recommendation as amended in the extras report.
Thank you very much. Is everybody quite happy to carry on? We have another 2 applications to consider. Or does anybody want a 5-minute break?
Can we have a break, please?
Yes. It is 7:15 by my watch. So as soon as possible after 7:20 and no later than 7:25. And don't forget to turn your microphones and videos off. Thank you. Are we all back now, Nikki and Ed? Yes.
Looks like we're all back.
Looks like it. Right. My vice chair very kindly offered to take the next item, and then I'll take the one after the last one. So over to Councillor Bennett.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So the next item is item number 3 on the agenda, P/20/2373/2. This is going to be presented by Deborah Liggins. Mr. Liggins, would you like to take over, please?
Thank you. Sorry, Chair. Can I check that Councillor Howe's here? His camera's not on, so just want to make sure he's here before we start. Maybe he's not back.
Oh, yes, I can't. No, I'm all right, but it says I can't start the camera as the host.
Okay, Councillor, how did you hear what I just said?
Yes, I can hear, but it says I can't start your video.
Okay.
It's not letting me.
Mr. Brown,
I'm there now.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay, thank
you
very much.
I'll mute myself. Cheers.
Super. Okay, well, if you heard what I'd said, I'm passing over the meeting now to Deborah Liggins, who's going to take over the presentation of the next item.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We'll just wait for the presentation to come up. Right, thank you. Item 3 tonight is on page 63 of your agenda and relates to land at the rear of 83 to 89 Loughborough Road, Havant. And the proposal is an outline planning application for the erection of up to 18 dwellings with all matters reserved except the means of access for future approval. Next slide, please. The site is situated to the southwest of Loughborough Road and is currently agricultural land use for the grazing of horses, and there are stables there associated with this. To the northwest of the site is Brunsley Croft, which is a backland housing site developed around 10 years ago. To the south, there is a further field between the site and the Garendon Avenue cul-de-sac of dwellings. The existing and proposed access to the site lies between number 89 and 97 Loughborough Road, which both have garages flanking the access. The conservation area is shown in hatched in orange on the plan, and you can see that the site lies wholly outside of it. The nearest listed building is just north of the proposed access, and this is the Anchor Inn, which is a Grade 2 listed building. Next slide, please. This is the field of the application site in the centre of the photo, although the red line area doesn't extend beyond the rear of Brunsley Croft dwellings. It cuts across as the cursor is showing you. The application site is approximately 3/4 of a hectare, and you can see that the field is largely grass with trees and hedgerows around the perimeter. The land is outside of the limits to development for Hathern and therefore defined as countryside. Although not apparent in this photo, the land rises steeply from Loughborough Road to the southwestern corner. Next slide, please. This slide shows the existing street views of Loughborough Road. The photo on the left is looking southeast towards Loughborough, and you can just see the gate just to the right-hand side past the stone wall, which is where the site is accessed from presently. The right-hand photo shows Loughborough Road looking in the opposite direction and northwest, with the access gate to the site just past the telegraph pole. On the left. The large white building on the right-hand side is the Grade 2 listed Anchor Inn. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of the existing access, which is an unsurfaced and gated track leading into the field behind the Loughborough Road dwellings. You can get a sense of how the land rises, and you can see that the properties either side are also significantly elevated above road level. Next slide, please. This is the proposed access, which is to be 5 metres wide and include visibility splays to both sides, with a pedestrian visibility splay on the northern side, as indicated on the drawing. Next slide, please. As you can see, there are lots of issues to consider. The principal development, the site lies outside the development, the limits to development, and is within countryside. Hathern is also an other settlement within the settlement hierarchy set out in policy CS1 of the core strategy. This policy does allow for small-scale development within the limits of such settlements, and as the proposal is on land outside the defined limits, it is at odds with the housing supply policy. Members will be aware, however, that the council is currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land, and decisions on housing proposals must therefore be taken based on an assessment as to whether there are adverse impacts to the proposal that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. As the officer report sets out, although there is some conflict with the development plan, it's considered that the proposal at the edge of this village is acceptable in principle. Housing mix, the proposal is outline planning permission only with no indicative layout submitted. And there are no details of proposed house types provided either. However, an assumption can be made that if 18 dwellings can be achieved on the land, 40% of these would be affordable units. That equates to 7 dwellings and would be a mix of houses to rent and shared ownership, and can be secured by way of legal agreement. There's no reason to believe that a mix of house types and sizes couldn't be provided on the site, and this would be subject to future reserve matters application. The achievement of a mix of house types in 10 years would be a positive of the scheme in the planning balance. Landscape and visual impact. The officer report makes an assessment of the landscape and visual impact of the proposal. The topography of the land plays a big part in concealing the site from wider views to the west. And whilst erecting dwellings on the land where there are currently none would introduce some visual changes, this impact would be localised and also small scale. The development would include new landscaping so that the visual and landscape impact would appear reduced over time. And whilst there may be some conflict with elements of policy CS2 and CS11, this is not considered to be significant, but should be considered still as part of the overall planning balance. Design, as mentioned earlier, no details of the design or the layout are known at this stage, but there's no reason to believe that high quality development couldn't be achieved at the site. And the proposal therefore accords with policies CS2 and EV1. Open space, policy CS15 seeks to ensure adequate open space is provided to serve the needs of the new development, and the applicant has submitted draft heads of term for a legal agreement to include the elements set out in the table in recommendation A of the officer report for either direct provision on site or a commuted sum towards other local existing new facilities. The proposal therefore accords with policy CS15. Amenity and noise. Whilst there is no site layout for consideration now, there is every prospect that minimum separation distances for privacy and an arrangement of dwellings that takes account of the topography and orientation of the site could be achieved. The submitted noise report recommends that the proposed access is flanked by an acoustic barrier to reduce traffic noise to the properties either side. And again, no details of this are provided, but you'll see suggested condition number 3 requires those details to be submitted as part of the reserved matters consideration later on. In terms of heritage, the site's not within the conservation area, but lies adjacent to it and the Grade 2 listed Anchor Inn. However, it is bisected from these heritage assets by the busy A6, and it's considered that the proposed housing development would be sufficiently distanced to not harm their significance or their settings, and it's considered the proposal meets the requirements of policy CS14 and the MPPF and the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act 1990. Arboriculture, the application isn't accompanied by an assessment of existing trees, but as we can see from the aerial photos, these are around the edges of the site, and it's considered that a layout could be achieved that retains most, if not all, of the existing trees. In this regard, it's considered the proposal could accord with policies CS2 and CS11. Ecology, the submitted ecology report shows there are no designated sites important for nature within the application red line area or close by. The report makes an assessment of the proposal in terms of protected species, and this is outlined in the officer report. The document recommends that further survey work is undertaken, and this is reflected in the proposed condition 8 of the officer report. Accordingly, it's considered that the development could comply with policy CS13 of the core strategy. Soil, policy CS16 lends support for development that protects agricultural resources, such as the best and most versatile agricultural land. And whilst the development may result in the loss of grade 3 agricultural land, it comprises a relatively small area that doesn't currently make a significant economic contribution to agricultural production. Whilst there is harm resulting from its loss, this would have a low economic impact, which would not amount to a significant adverse impact, which could justify a refusal of planning permission. It's considered the proposal would comply with policy CS16 in that respect. Flood risk drainage. The site is within flood zone 1, where the risk of flooding is generally low. The development proposal would of course need to be subject to surface water drainage strategy to ensure runoff can be managed and to demonstrate flood risk wouldn't be increased. And this requirement is reflected in condition 12 of the officer recommendation. Accordingly, it's considered the proposal would meet with policy CS 16. Highway matters. The local highway authority has carefully considered the submitted highway report and is satisfied that the geometry of the proposed access would result in a safe and suitable means of access to serve the quantum of development, subject to the imposition of planning conditions. Although the internal road layout, again, is not known at this stage, there's no reason that adequate car parking couldn't be provided for each dwelling and that highway standards couldn't be met. The proposal is considered to accord with the relevant development plan policies and advice contained within the MPPF. In terms of infrastructure, the officer report sets out the various requests made by consultees in terms of securing social and other infrastructure to meet the additional demands placed on services as a result of the proposed housing development. These are set out in the table in the officer report, and those which are considered to be still compliant are set out in the table which members are asked to consider as recommendation A. Provided these contributions can be secured and the applicant has indicated their agreement to provide those, it is considered the development would accord with policy CS 24. So in terms of the planning balance, again, another site where the council has insufficient supply of deliverable housing sites within Charnwood, and members will now be very familiar with the need to apply the tilted balance when determining applications on the basis of paragraph 11D of the MPPF. At this time, this means that in order to refuse proposals for housing, there must be adverse impacts which would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. In this case, the development would provide up to 18 new units, 7 of which would be affordable homes at a time when there is an acute need for these. This is considered to be a significant benefit of the scheme. Whilst these dwellings would not be provided in the most sustainable settlement in the borough, it would be adjacent to Hathern, where there are some local facilities and bus services to higher order centres or large employment areas, for example, in Loughborough, or the commercial developments around the airport. The site offers the potential for high quality design and a mixed housing scheme, and there are no technical constraints relating to highways, noise or flooding that can't be mitigated. Ecological gain and landscape compensation can be secured by way of detailed landscape design, and impacts on infrastructure can be offset within the site or via commuted sums to be used off-site as indicated in the report. And these are all considered to be benefits of the scheme. So weighed against those benefits is the conflict with the policies of the core strategy and the policies of the Borough of Charnwood local plan, which don't seek to provide housing, particularly in this location. There would also be some localised harm to landscape and visual amenity, and a small loss of agricultural land, as mentioned earlier. However, given the council's current position on housing land supply, it's considered that the harms of the development would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. It's therefore recommended that planning permission be granted in accordance with the proposed heads of terms set out in recommendation A and the conditions set out in recommendation B. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you for that. We have 3 speakers on this. We have Michael Ely on behalf of residents, Jonathan Weeks on behalf of the applicant, and Councillor Keith Harris. Can I ask Ed Brown if the first speaker is ready to join us?
He should just be joining now.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael Ely, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You have 5 minutes. After 4 minutes, Mr. Brown will indicate you have 1 minute remaining. Start when ready.
I'm speaking on behalf of the residents this application affects. Hopefully you will have all have read the full details of all I'm going to refer to. This present application has made a lot of reference to the previous two in 2014 and 15, which were refused. So we included all our objections to those. In those previous applications, the developer supplied a watered down office version of the A6 that in no way reflected the true facts of the heavy traffic flow and dangers on the A6 through Havant. We pointed out the true facts in a real world version of the A6. We felt ignored, as Leicester County Council Highways et al. Was still saying there was no significant danger going to be caused by the proposed access. We challenged LCC Highways on this and received a very condescending, dismissive and quite worrying email reply, telling us, in short, they know the A6 is an extremely busy road. They accepted our additional information would have made a difference to the results their decision was based on, but they were sticking to their decision based on the watered down office version, which had facts and data missing and data collected at an extreme time when traffic flow was a small percentage of the normal. They added, we might be a little bit upset by them telling us this. Too right we are, especially when 6 years on, another application with now 50% more dwellings than previously, a large increase in the heavy traffic flow on the A6. LCC Highways are still sticking to their stance based on the developer's information. They can't see any problems again. Another watered down office version of the A6 supplied, done in a national lockdown this time, not showing any detailed measurements on their submitted plan, which, if done, would show the very limited and inadequate pedestrian and disabled access and egress, as our submitted plan shows. They have relied on previous decisions that are now very much out of date and proved to be made with data that was wrong 6 years ago. The real world version of the A6 is even worse now. The extreme long-term flooding issues that have had many failed attempts to be dealt with. 2019 pre-lockdown traffic flow was extremely heavy. All the many new housing developments in surrounding areas contributing to this. Amazon Hub opened in August 2019. East Midlands Gateway Rail Freight Interchange opened February 2020. These causing a large increase in commercial and general traffic, even in lockdown. This large commercial development is nowhere near up to its full capacity yet, so we haven't seen anywhere near the full impact this will make. Plus, the imminent Garendon Estate major development of 3,200 dwellings, plus shops and commercial sites to come, which will also link the A512 Ashby Road with the A6 Derby Road in close proximity to the proposed access, adding even more traffic. If anyone parked a vehicle on the road where this housing estate access is proposed, being in the zigzag lines of the crossing, it would be classed as dangerous, and being illegal, they would be fined and receive points on their licence. This is a concealed field access in a dangerous hazard-filled part of the extremely busy A6, a major route for all traffic through the small village of Havant. We have again supplied the real-world version of this road, including photographs taken during the national lockdown, with the very busy Anchor Inn closed, many businesses, shops closed, schools closed, the bus service majorly reduced with hardly any passengers.
1 minute remaining.
These photographs still show the many hazards caused by the traffic. If these dangers are as apparent during the extreme times like these, this indicates how bad they are in normal times of the pre-lockdown traffic flow. With all the new developments completed since the first lockdown and to come, adding further to this traffic, with it being impossible to resolve the concealment and inadequate pedestrian facility issues of the proposed access, and with traffic conditions, even in lockdown, easily compromising visibility displays and safety, how can it ever be considered turning this very infrequently used field access into a frequently used on a daily basis access to an 18 dwelling housing estate at this already hazard filled location? We don't want to be ignored anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ely. Ms. Liggins, I'm just going to come back to you and ask if at this stage, would you like to respond to what's just been said?
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. Suffice to say that the Highway Authority are still the experts in terms of assessing traffic and transport impact of proposals. The applicant did submit a transport assessment that provided data on expected or anticipated vehicle movements to and from the site. And the Highway Authority have considered all of that data and also considered the cumulative impact of the development, and that looks at other development nearby, and is still of the opinion that the highway, the proposed access would be okay and accord with its standards and the MPPF, which indicate paragraph 109, development should only be refused on highway grounds if it would result in severe residual highway harm to the network. That isn't the case here. In terms of previous inspectors and refusals, the development hasn't previously been refused on highway grounds, and the inspector has considered the same point of access and found it to be a suitable means of access to serve a residential development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm now going to call Jonathan Weeks on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Brown, is Mr. Weeks available?
Just calling him in now. He should be in now.
Okay, Mr. Weeks, can you hear me? Mr. Weeks, can you hear me?
Yep. I can hear you. You can hear me hopefully now.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
You have 5 minutes to speak. After 4 minutes, Mr. Brown will indicate you have 1 minute remaining. So when you're ready, you may start.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Good evening, councillors. As noted to you by your officers, this outline application has been recommended for approval. It's followed consideration through 2 planning processes, with the site included in the emerging local plan for housing. I know it's not at a stage you can give it a lot of weight, but this is a piece of land which is being allocated in the future, and also through the application which is before you this evening. On both occasions, the council have considered the site suitable for residential development. Particular relevance, as has been identified through the last couple of applications and this one, the council do not have a 5-year land supply at the moment, and therefore, in line with paragraph 11 of the framework, you have to be looking to recommend approval and grant consent unless there are significant and demonstrable harm. Ms. Liggins has obviously identified that she doesn't consider that there is any harm, and that is the stance of the officers. There has been reference which was made to there being previous applications on this site. These were considered at a time though where the council had a 5-year land supply, and they were actually for detailed proposals. So it is very different to the situation which is before you tonight and the application before you. In terms of the proposal, yes, the land is outside the limits of development, and it's therefore technically in conflict with the settlement boundary and some of the countryside policies. However, the weight which can actually be attributed to all of these policies is tempered by the lack of the 5-year land supply and the outdated housing figures upon which these policies were formulated. This leads to the need to undertake the planning balance for the proposal, where it can only be rejected if there is significant and demonstrable harm. The site itself is adjacent to Haddon, where limited additional housing is considered acceptable. The location is sustainable on this basis, and it's actually offering access to facilities in the settlement as well as public transport and ease of access into Loughborough. The outline, the proposal is an outline application, and it's only for access to be considered at this stage. And the highway report shows that there is the ability to provide a compliant access with visibility splays, which, although it's suggested is actually a concealed access, you've got visibility splays 3 and 4 times the necessary distance which are possible on this one. It's got very good visibility. And although there is concern which has been raised by the local councillor and the residents, there is no objection, as has been said again, by County Highways. As was suggested by Debbie, it has to actually have severe impact to be rejected on highways grounds as per paragraph 109 of the framework. All of the consultee comments which were provided show that, subject to the imposition of conditions, that the proposal is acceptable. This is no different, i.e. the imposition of conditions, to what you get on any other development site. And in terms of a number of the points which were raised on technical matters, just clarify a few of the main ones. So ecology, the conclusions of everybody is that the site can actually be constructed under licence to protect the nearby badger sets, and there is scope to improve the ecological value of the site overall. So it's net gain. Noise, as was suggested by Ms Liggins, acoustic fencing along the sides of the access road. This is commonplace a lot of the times where you have a driveway through to sites adjacent to existing houses. It looks the same as closed board fencing, or it can look the same as closed board fencing, and this is a finish which can be controlled by the conditions stroke the reserve matters, as has already been outlined. Neighbour amenity, we're looking at a site here which we haven't given a layout yet, but it's 0.75 of a hectare and we've got 18 dwellings, so that's a density.
1 minute remaining.
24 dwellings per hectare, so it's not a high level. There is certainly scope to be able to actually get any offset which is needed between properties to ensure everybody has actually got a decent level of amenity retained in line with the council's guidelines. The fact that it's also a description of up to 18 dwellings means that if in the future there is some issue with being able to get the full 18 in, it can be reduced through discussions with the officers to come to a scheme which everybody is actually happy complies with all of your guidelines. And then the final point is just on flood risk. As per all sites, it needs to be positively drained and designed to reduce runoff rates, so it would actually have a positive impact upon its outflows into the area rather than actually add to the problems. So on the balance, there is no issues which are sufficient to actually reject this proposal. The only harm which
time's up.
Yeah.
Thank you. The last speaker is Councillor Keith Harris. Is Councillor Harris available, please?
I'll just get him in. Bear with me. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello.
Councillor Harris, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. You have 5 minutes. After 4 minutes, Mr. Brown will indicate that you have 1 minute remaining. Start when you're ready.
Thank you, Vice Chair. This application was for 14, 12 and 10 houses in the past and was refused. This latest application is for 18, nearly double the last time. I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the already serious congestion problems on the A6, despite Leicestershire County Council Highways' dismissal of them as insignificant. The residents find this difficult to believe. Drivers would find it very difficult to exit such a development as this in peak times, a situation which is already getting worse with the new Amazon hub and which will deteriorate further when the traffic from the Garendon Sue flows exclusively onto the Havant side for many years. There are many egress and access points within tens of meters of the proposed egress point, including the larger Garendon Avenue, small developments such as Hunt's Orchards and Brunsley Croft, and many unnamed ones along the stretch of the A6 concerned. Also within tens of meters from this proposed additional junction, there are already numerous driveways or roads onto the A6 from the opposite side, including Wide Street, one of the 3 arteries of the village. With this many junctions and the fact that some are almost opposite each other, this creates challenges for all road users. Traffic from the proposed development would enter the flow at a perfect storm of hazards at that particular point, being immediately opposite the exit of the Anchor Inn, just right of a pedestrian crossing, near a bus stop, and where cars are increasingly parked on the road. This walkway is a popular area for residents to use, and given that this pedestrian crossing is the only traffic light controlled crossing in this part of the village, it is a common area for children to cross in order to reach the village centre. The drivers would not be able to see the pedestrians until their bonnets are advanced onto the pavement. The frequent bus traffic would also present a hazard when turning right out of the development, i.e. southbound to Loughborough, as the location of the bus stop in comparison to the driveway of this development means that the southbound traffic would not be visible when a bus stops. Residents approaching from the north would find it very difficult to enter the development given the proximity of the bus stop and the prohibition to turn right. They would cause a serious logjam for others to proceed through the village. The noise impact report submitted with the planning application focuses on the noise impact to the 2 properties located alongside the entranceway to the development. The development will also affect properties located around the other sides of the development, e.g. Brunsley Croft, especially numbers 9 and 10, who currently enjoy a relatively quiet environment. The same report recommends acoustic barriers of 2.5 meters in height along the length of the access road and to the side of the gardens at numbers 83 and 89 Loughborough Road in order to maintain the nuisance noise within limits comparable to the existing noise. These 2.5 meter acoustic barriers could be considered imposing upon the residents of these properties, who currently have much lower fence lines. In addition to reducing the light available to these properties, acoustic barriers are typically industrial and basic in style, which would affect the aesthetics of these existing properties and the pleasantness of their gardens. I would like to thank the committee for hearing my points and would urge the members to refuse permission for this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Before I open it up to the meeting, Ms. Liggins, do you want to come back on any of those points raised by the last 2 speakers?
Yes, thank you. It's just to respond to a point that Mr. Weeks made about the site being allocated in a future development plan for Havant. Just to say that the draft, I think he was referring to a preferred options document, as the actual draft emerging local plan has yet to be published and no allocated, the allocation of sites is not yet finalised or sorted out. So I can only assume that he was referring to the options, preferred options document. In terms of noise raised by Councillor Harris, the submitted acoustic report, of course, just concentrates on the noise generated at the point of the vehicular access, as that's the only item, as well as the principle of the development, under consideration at this stage. We don't have a final layout, so obviously there will be some noise and disturbance on a residential basis because the site's proposed to be developed for housing and all the garden and paraphernalia associated noise that goes with the residential use of buildings. But no acoustic report could address those points in detail without a definitive layout at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, I'm now going to open it up to the meeting. In the order of which I've seen hands go up, it's Councillor Fryer first, followed by Councillor Ward, then Councillor Lowe. So over to you, Councillor Fryer.
Thank you very much. I've lost my put your hand up signal. I don't know where that's gone. Just a couple of points I'd like to ask for clarification. First of all, on page 65, this is really I think a correction of the report. Under the development plan policies, the second sentence of policy CS1 refers to Burton on the Wolds. I don't think that's supposed to be there. And the other thing I have, the other 2 points on page 64, it states that the proposed access would be a shared private access drive. Does that mean it's just for the residents of this proposed new development? This is a clarification. I do have a little bit of concern because the site that's being proposed for development is almost cut in half. So that is leaving half a field at the back isolated, I presume. And I just wonder whether the proposed access is to that field as well. So those are the 3 points I would just like for clarification, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Before moving on to the next councillor, I'm going to ask Ms Liggins to come back on those points.
Yes, thank you for pointing out the typo in the report. It should, of course, refer to Haven under policy CS1. In terms of the description of the access as a shared private access drive, that was how it was described within the application by the applicant. So whether or not it's intended to offer it up for adoption once a detailed layout is known, it's not known at this stage. So that was that. And what was the third point?
It was the field.
As I say, without a definitive layout, we don't know the internal road layout and whether or not it's going to lead to other land potentially within the applicant's control. But the red line area is what we're looking at tonight, and that's for up to 18 dwellings. It could be fewer, as indicated by the applicant, but 18 at a maximum.
Through you, Vice Chair, if I may, I'll just come back on that. As it is quite limited on the detailed information that we've got tonight, and I know it will go back, come back for more discussion. Does it have the right to come back to this committee when we're looking at layout and access and everything else, or would it be delegated to the officers? Thank you very much.
Ms Liggins, do you want to come back on that?
Me too.
Usually, if applications have already been before members, then and it attracts wide public interest, then, or it's called in under the councillor call-in procedures, then of course it can come back to Plans Committee at the reserved matters stage.
Okay, thank you. Right, before we move on to the next councillor, I see that Mrs Jackson's got a hand up. Do you want to come in, Mrs Jackson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to pick up on the point, I think about half a field, and obviously it is a field, and fields can be accessed from the wider site. We don't know how the site is farmed. If it's the same farmer, then they will access it. I think the point of only half the site is an important design aspect that members should consider. You know, that the developer hasn't brought forward the whole site. They've only brought forward the same extent of what's already been developed in Haven. So it's not extending further beyond the already built form of the site next door. And that's, you know, a deliberate decision I would expect from the applicant.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up, I have Councillor Ward, if you'd like to
thank you, Chair.
Ask a question.
Thank you. Obviously, as one of the ward councillors for Hathern. I am quite familiar with the area this application's gone into. And I do have some concerns. I know the county councillors, the highway authority, have stated that they don't have any concerns, but I know how busy this road is, and I know how much the area has also suffered with flooding. So is the highway and the flood authority. For them to come back and say they have no concerns whatsoever, I think I can understand really why residents are quite surprised by that. I'm also concerned because because of the size of the proposed development, obviously no environmental survey's been necessary, but there is an active badger set directly adjacent to the site. There are hedgerows that are species rich. Bats have been found nesting in the immediate area, or there have been site habitats that were suitable for bats. And I don't think any of that's really been considered. And also in the part of the highways section, there's an estimate for how many cars are likely to be entering and exiting the site at peak times, and the numbers given is 14. Considering there's 18 properties being proposed for this site, I think that's a very conservative figure, and it's more likely to be double that, if not more, unless at least half of these people are not having to go to work on a daily basis. I don't know. So I do have concerns about all of those things, and the fact that we don't have any designs provided at the moment. And the fact that it's an arterial route, as has already been stated, this is a really busy road and it's only set to get busier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to bear in mind at this stage it's an outline planning application. Councillor Tassler, I see you with your hand up, but before you, there's Councillor Lowe and Councillor Capleton. I'll give you a shout when your time's ready. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. In all due respect to the officers, Chair, I'm getting a little bit fed up of having this 5-year supply rammed down my throat. I do feel, and I think I mentioned it the other day, that the 5-year supply, yes, we all know we need a 5-year supply, but I feel like we're having a gun held to our head, which I think is a little bit unfair. I can see you shaking your head, but I'm sure you agree with me in some respects, Chair. The other thing, in reference to this application, I would have no problem having houses on this bit of land. I think it's quite well suited for houses, but I've got a little bit of, or a major concern that we have got no mix. There could be 2.5-storey houses, and I've not seen anything in the report to say that could be any different. Perhaps the officers can just verify that for us, Chair.
Yes, certainly. I'm going to ask Mrs. Jackson to come back in on those points raised.
Thank you, Chair. Members might get frustrated with us keep reminding you about the 5-year supply, but it is a material consideration that MPPF is extremely clear how local planning authorities have to consider planning application when they do not have a deliverable 5-year supply of housing. That's in paragraph 11D, and it does clearly state that those developments, those policies which are most important for the determination of the application, those that restrict housing, must be considered, out of date. You can't give them full weight, and we need to take that in mind. And it also very clearly states that the harm identified must significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. That is the situation we are in. That is what we have to consider and how we have to consider them. And failing to do that would find us in very difficult positions going forward in appeals and potentially challenges as well. So we might sound like stuck records, but it is extremely important that we determine these applications in the correct manner. In terms of the housing mix. It is outline stage, so those details aren't known, but we still have the relevant policies. So when the reserve matters comes in, they have to show that it meets the identified need and considers the character of the area. I was just going to check the conditions, but yes, it is in there. And if you go to the recommended conditions, recommended condition 5 relates to housing mix, and it secures just that very point I was saying. So the mix submitted as part of the reserve matters for both market houses and affordable homes has to have regard for both that identified housing need, the most recent of which is Hedner at this current time, but obviously if this comes forward later and there's a more up-to-date housing need, that would be used, and also the character of the area. So that's secured under condition 5.
Thank you. Next up is Councillor Capleton.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add a little bit to what's been said about the access. I'm extremely worried about this. I've been looking at it on the satellite images, and it's a little wider than a 5-bar gate. And just wonder if it's really wide enough to have for the 14, 18, 20 vehicles using it. Also, on the western side of this track, there's a house which has its hedge right up to the track and a big tree right on the corner. Also, the boundaries of the neighbours are stone walls, going to have to be, which further limit the visibility as you come out onto the A6. Start adding acoustic cladding to this passageway, and we're going to decrease the width even further. So I just think we're going to have give a lot more thought to the access. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for that. Ms. Liggins, do you want to come back on that at all at this stage?
Yes, thank you. I think responding to Councillor Ward's point about the report, first of all, on page 64, when it talks about the highway statement prepared by Edwards and Edwards, the reference to 12 and 14 dwellings on the site was referring to the previous planning history, where inspectors considered the site suitable to cater for that quantum of development proposed at the time. Obviously, we've got an outline application now for up to 18 dwellings, and the latest transport assessment includes data relevant to the proposal now, and that's been assessed fully by the Highway Authority. The other point about the width of the access, the plans show that the access is wider than, well, the land available at the access point is wider than the 5-bar gate, and that the width would be increased in accordance with the access plan that was displayed during the presentation, with pedestrian visibility provided on the western side and the appropriate visibility displays for traffic provided on both sides.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Next up is Councillor Tassell, and then I believe Councillor Ward, you want to come back after Councillor Tassell. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I've got concerns about the access as well. And I know and I use the A6 very regularly, and it is an extremely busy road. In fact, from where this gateway is, we are actually normally queuing from the traffic lights up at the Shepshed wide lane junction. The traffic comes right back down there. We're sitting there. So they would have to put something on the road to keep the traffic away, like a keep clear sign or something, because it really, really is a very, very busy road. But the other thing that worries me is that the southern boundary of this piece of land And the small eastern boundary that just sticks out will be part of the west of Loughborough Zoo. So is that all going to be built on? Why have they not gone into this so that they can go into the Zoo with an access rather than going on to the A6? That is a big, this whole thing is a very, very big worry in this case with what's going to be built all the way along the back of here, 3,200 houses as part of the west of Loughborough Zoo. And I don't think that, I can't see that that's been taken into consideration at all.
Thank you, Councillor Tassel. I see that Mrs. Jackson's still got her hand up. Mrs. Jackson, did you want to come back on that point?
I wanted to come back on the highway point, if I may, Chair. I am listening to the conversations and, you know, obviously members are using their own local knowledge, which is fine. But I have to highlight the County Highway Authority's comments. They are the County Highway Authority. They are the experts that advise us on these matters, and they also will know how busy the road is. They will have taken into account cumulative impact of committed developments and future developments that have planning permission but haven't yet been built out. I also need to refer members to paragraph 109 of the MPPF, which guides decisions when we are concerned about highway impacts, and that says that development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impact on the road network would be secure. Now, the County Highway Authority's advice has been extremely clear on this, and they do not think that is the case on this occasion, and I can only pass on that message that we're being given through those official consultation requests. Obviously, the developments in the past have also not been refused on highway grounds, and one of which has been to an appeal. And the inspector has reviewed those issues as well. So members just need to be mindful of that. You know, I am worried about that and how we would demonstrate a reason for refusal that would result in significant and demonstrable harm from that access, as well as meeting para 109. In terms of access, there's been a lot about people pulling out and the fact that, you know, it's a fast and busy road. We've also heard that it queues and there's traffic lights and cars are moving quite slowly. There are objects in that highway, including crossings and things that do naturally slow the traffic down in that part of Loughborough Road. So I just had to point that out to everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ward, you wanted to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on what Ms Liggins said, actually, what I was referring to wasn't on the page that she referenced. It was on page 82, and it was about the number of trip movements, which is listed as 13, a total of 13 during both the morning and evening peak periods. And it's this that I was referencing as a conservative estimate, considering we have 18 properties planned for this site. And the other thing was that I forgot to ask the first time, nothing's been mentioned about the proposed Haddon Community Woodland, which I understand is going to be sited very, very close to this development. It wasn't mentioned as one of the wildlife sites because obviously it doesn't exist yet, but it is going through the stages. And I just wanted to ask officers how close it will be and what the impact on it will be of potentially of a development on this site. Thank you.
Mrs. Jackson, you've still got your hand up. Does that mean you wanted to come back on this point, or you just left it up accidentally? Or do you want to come back and answer this point anyway?
I did just leave it up accidentally. I'll let Debbie take it unless she wants to, unless I need to come back in afterwards, but I don't want to jump in before her.
Okay, Ms. Liggins, then do you want to see if you can answer that question?
Well, simply said, the Havant Woodland community doesn't form part of planning policy that's adopted yet. As Councillor Ward has said, it's still very much in its formulative stages. So we have to deal with applications based on the policies that are applicable on the day they're decided. Obviously, the report sets out the ecological impact and the mitigation that may be required following further survey work to be carried out at the reserve matters stage. And again, that mitigation can be secured at that time and provided either on site or off site.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up, I've got Councillor Campsall. Then after Councillor Campsall, we're back to Councillor Lowe.
Yeah, no, I'm okay now. It was about the traffic and that and flooding, but it's all been answered by Jackie.
Okay, thank you very much. In which case, then I'm going to ask Councillor Lowe to speak next.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I've listened to what everybody said, and I can understand people's concerns about traffic. I can understand people's concerns about everything else that they've mentioned, but I don't think we've got any choice. So therefore, I propose we go with officer's recommendation. I would like to see it come back to Plans Committee at some point, just to be sure that I'm content with what's being built. But I will go with officer's recommendation at this point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Savage.
I can see no problems with this development whatsoever. I think it could be a nice development, and I'd like to second Councillor Lowe's proposal.
Is that for, I think there's two parts to this.
On both parts, to accept.
Recommendation A and B.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you. Well, we've got a proposer proposed by Councillor Lowe, seconded by Councillor Savage. Unless anybody else has got anything else to add, I'm going to put that to the vote. Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley, Vice Chair. I want to be clear. If we are minded to vote for the proposal we have before us, can we stipulate that when it comes to reserve matters, we want to see this back at planning, please?
Mrs. Jackson.
Yeah, calling is set out in the Constitution, so it would be determined in that way. So if the ward councillors are listening and they recall it when they're looking, they can call in the application. Other than that, it would be because it's significantly controversial or the other reasons that would be called into Plans Committee under the Constitution. I'm looking to legal now, but I don't think we can override and add to the Constitution. So it would be controlled by the Constitution in terms of coming back before you.
Yes, if you'd like me to add to that, I agree with Jackie on the Constitution sets out the reasons for calling, and it would be right, I think, in the Planning Commission to change what is in our Constitution.
You're muted, Vice Chair.
Sorry, yes, I've just realised. Miss Harrison, I was just going to invite you to come back in, but you beat me to it. Councillor Forrest, is that satisfactory for you?
Yes, just I have huge doubts about what we have before us, but I really don't. There isn't enough to go against officer's recommendation, but I think there are a lot of other things that we could talk about this, but that would wait to reserve matters. So I'm happy. Well, I am content to go with the proposal that we pass this, but I would want to see it back before plans. So I think it's up to the ward councillors.
Right. Well, we've got Councillor Ward here. I believe it's your ward, isn't it, Councillor Ward? So I'm sure you'll be eager to bring it back to us when the time comes. Thank you.
I'm sure we can have a look at it when the reserved matters application comes.
Right, lovely, thank you. Right, I'm going to put this now to the vote. It's been proposed by Councillor Lowe, seconded by Councillor Savage. I'm going to read out everybody's names in alphabetical order, starting with Councillor Campsell.
Against, Chair.
Against, thank you. Councillor Capleton.
Can I abstain, please, Chair?
Okay, Councillor Charles.
For, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Forrest.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Fryer.
Sorry, for.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Lowe.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ransom.
For, Chair.
So was that for?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Savage, I'm guessing for.
For, Chair.
Councillor Tassell.
Abstain.
Okay. Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. For.
Councillor Ward.
Against, Chair.
Okay, and I'm for. So I think we've got 2 abstentions.
No, you forgot me.
Councillor Howe.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Howe. Sorry, terribly sorry.
There we are. Yeah. Reluctantly for.
For. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I think that makes 3. Is that 4 abstentions? No. I'm going to ask Catherine Harrison to come in with the results.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My reckoning that was carried with a vote of 9 for, 2 against and 2 abstentions. If someone could just second that, I'd be grateful.
I can confirm.
I confirm that.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, okay, well that item's passed. I'm now passing the chair back to Councillor Fryer. Does anybody require a quick 5 minutes, or does everybody want to press on?
This is our last one.
Press on, Chair.
Press on.
So
okay, thank you.
Hopefully we'll finish fairly quick.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
I'm now moving, thank you very much, Vice Chair. We're now moving to the final item, item 4, application P20/2124/2, and it's land adjacent to 6 Gisborough Way. And we haven't got any councillors who've declared an interest, so we'll go straight to Deborah again to present this, and then we have 1 speaker.
Thank
so
you,
over
Chair.
to you, Deborah.
Thank you. Just wait for the slides. Lovely, thank you. So as Councillor Fryer said, item 4 is on page 90 of your agenda. It relates to an application made under section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act and is an application for the development of land for 1 dwelling without compliance with condition 9 of P19/0920, which removed permitted development rights for fences and set out the minimum distances they needed to be from highway boundaries. So next slide, please. This is a plan showing the location of the site. You can see that it occupies a corner position at the junction of Gisborough Way and Byland Way, and the dwelling previously granted for the site is at an advanced stage of construction. Next slide, please. So members of the Plans Committee considered the original request for planning permission in 2017, which related to the land which was formerly public open space and which was subsequently sold by the original estate developer. Having granted planning permission for the erection of a dwelling on the site in 2017, a planning condition was imposed requiring any boundary fence on the Gisborough Way boundary to be set back 5 metres from the highway boundary, and any fence on the Byland Way boundary to be set back 4 metres. The reason for this was to provide an open aspect to the front and side in the interest of the character and appearance of the area. The condition was carried forward as condition 9 of P190920, which itself was an application which sought to regularise the development, which was found to be being built with slight variations to the approved plans. So this current application before members tonight asks the local planning authority to revisit the need for that condition 9. Next slide, please. This is an aerial photo of the site. You can see Gisborough Way and Byland Way with the dwelling under construction. Next slide, please. These are photographs of the site, and you can see that some fences have already been erected to part of the Gisborough Way and Byland Way boundaries, and these are actually 2.25 metres high and exceed the height of the fences now being sought, which are proposed to be 1.8 metres high, close bordered fences. The Gisborough Way boundary fence has also been erected significantly closer to the boundary than the current proposal, which would see it, the lower 1.8 metre high fence set back 2 metres from the back edge of the pavement. Although the position of the Byland Way fence, which has been erected level with the front of the house, as you can see in the top right photo, again, the height needs to be reduced to 1.8 metres to accord with the submitted drawings as proposed now. The photos to the bottom of the picture show what would be the rear garden of the permitted dwelling, and for some reason a fence has been erected immediately to the rear of the house, as you can see pointed by the cursor, as if to separate this area and create a further plot, and this has been to the consternation of local residents. To confirm, there are no current proposals for the area, and this planning application before members tonight considers the area behind the pink screen fencing as part of the permitted garden to the authorised dwelling. Next slide, please. So this is the submitted plan proposed now, the site layout plan, which shows the boundary fences at reduced heights of 1.8 metres, with a revised 2 metre setback position for the Gisborough Way boundary, which is the long boundary of the plot. You can see that landscaping is indicated on the drawing with a mixed hedge to be planted in front of both fences, and also tree planting to the front of the Byland Way fence. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the reason for imposing the conditional originally was in the interests of the character and appearance of the area, and the photographs you can see here show various examples of fences which have been erected close to the application site, and some in the same street, which are set on or very close to the highway boundaries, and none of which have the 2 metre and 5 metre setbacks like the fences included within the current proposal. Records show that in erecting some of these areas, erecting some of the fences in the photographs, areas of landscaping and shrubbery have been removed in order to enclose as much ground as possible as residential curtilage. Next slide, please. So, having already accepted under previous applications that the principle of developing the site for a dwelling, and having also accepted its design and appearance and considerations of highway safety and residential amenities, the key issue to consider under this application is the effect of removing or varying the condition relating to boundary fencing and the impact on the visual amenity of the area. At this site, we have already accepted that the land no longer functions as or has the appearance of public open space, and we've seen from the photographs in the previous slide that close bordered fences, even in corner locations are not out of character with the appearance of the street scene or the locality. So, as set out in the officer reports, considered the proposed setbacks of 2 metres and 5 metres are more than reasonable to avoid visual incongruous features within the street scene, and their positions would allow good quality planting in front as indicated on the submitted plan, and some openness would be retained to those boundaries. The officer report sets out planning conditions which would see the implementation of the approved fences, if you were minded to grant tonight, within 2 months of today, and the landscaping required to be carried out in the first planting season following first occupation of the dwelling. If planning permission is granted this evening, a further condition recommends permitted development rights continue to be removed, so fences are not relocated to positions closer to the highway boundary than those being considered tonight. So in conclusion, it's considered the proposal is acceptable in this location and will not cause visual harm to the appearance of the street scene in accordance with policies CS2 and EV1. The fences are also considered acceptable in terms of highway safety and don't obstruct visibility in accordance with the Leicestershire Highways Design Guide, and it's recommended planning permission is granted subject to the conditions set out in the officer report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Liggin. We have one speaker on behalf of the residents, and that is Mr. Graham Waller. Is Mr. Waller with us?
Just bring him in, Chair.
Thank you very much.
He should be in now.
Right. Mr. Waller, can you hear us, and could you unmute yourself, please?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful.
You have 5 minutes, and after 4 minutes, Mr. Brown will tell you you've just got 1 minute left. So when you're ready, please go ahead.
Okay. I'll start with a couple of quotes. And for the reasons set out above, I therefore respectively suggest, that is, suggest that the proposal should be looked upon favourably. And another quote, should this proposal be refused, my client will exercise their right of appeal via the planning inspectorate. As I shall demonstrate, it may be that there's no given right to appeal in this case, and neither should the council bow to such language. At every step of the way, the developer has undermined the plans, built what they wanted, and submitted retrospective applications, and often very late. Here are the breaches. It is 1 metre forward of the original plan. There is now no parking suitable for an average family car, which will overhang even if it is in contact with the building. The patio doors have been moved from the back to the side in order to move the back garden from the back to the side, and you'll see why. No longer are there beautifully landscaped gardens. The fence encloses the house too closely to have anything that resembles a garden, fortuitously leaving a patch of house-sized wasteland to the rear. The fence was supposed to be 1.85 metres. It is now 2.25 metres, and the height resulting in adverse scale and dominance. It was supposed to be providing an open aspect to the side with landscaping to give visibility on egress from Byland Way, not an oversight, a feature of every junction on this estate and a necessary requirement for highway safety. Because of this, the applicant makes reference to not reasonably being expected to have the necessary public liability insurance. However, public liability insurance is to protect a business if a claim is made against it. This is not a business unless he lodges a change of use application. The applicant seeks to remove condition 9 from application P19092022, yet he didn't ask to remove condition 12 of P161833. He claims this condition is an oversight, but it wasn't an oversight in October 2017. He claims he has been unnecessarily delayed due to the protracted negotiations. These negotiations have only taken place due to the applicant's complete inability to adhere to the submitted plans and conditions. And now to our objection, entirely based on Charnwood Borough Council's Planning Enforcement Plan, March 2018. I trust you've read the objections, but I'll reiterate them here. Section 4.1 states that a breach of planning control, as defined in Section 171A of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, the carrying out of a development without the requirement or failing to comply with any condition or limitation subject to which planning permission has been granted. The previous application and the current discharge application both fall foul of this section. 6.2 states that situations creating harm in planning terms are adverse or incongruous impact on visual amenity due to poor design or inappropriate materials. And this applies to all of the applications, especially the fence. 6.5 indicates that recourse available through negotiation. As such, I would expect to remove the unauthorized development and alter developments to ensure compliance with committed development rights if it applies, both your quotes. Section 8.3 suggests that these breaches should be classed as medium priority, and I'll quote again, development that causes harm to the amenities of the neighbours and development not in accordance with the approved plans. I believe this is highlighted in section 8.5 being factors that will be considered when prioritising cases, in particular, previous case history. This isn't the first time the applicant has applied knowing their breaches. The likelihood of the breach being repeated. Last time he said the council couldn't deal with speculation. I quote, it can only deal with hard facts. Yet this comment is at odds with speculative likelihood. The applicant would far rather not build in accordance with the approved plans and see if someone complains or notices than he would apply. The likelihood of a breach repeating, exceptionally high. The recourses can only be a section 14.4 enforcement notice effective after 28 days, or a section
1 minute remaining.
Breach of condition notice taking immediate effect, and for this there is no right to appeal. Furthermore, I would ask that you consider a section 215 untidy land notice, as this building site has been like this for 3 years now. It's untidy and adversely affects the amenity of the area. The only reason he's built this is to secure planning permission for a second property. There has already been refused plans, P14 1773-2 and P15 1638-2. Even the applicant's latest letter says, for now. Please note, even if you agree to remove condition 9 tonight, the applicant is still in breach of the plans by virtue of the fact that the fence line on the plans is not where the fence has already been built. It is much higher than the plans stipulate, and there is no opportunity to lay the garden to grass. I implore you tonight to do the right thing, not the easy thing. You have to reject. Thank you for the opportunity of letting me speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waller. Miss Liggins, did you want to come back first?
Yes.
I think you'd probably clarify that we can't take into account some of the comments about what he's threatened to do or not threatened to do, the applicant.
Yeah, I mean, as Mr. Waller pointed out, we're not saying that there is no breach of planning control in this occasion. The application seeks to regularise and get members to have another look to see whether that condition 9 is to be removed completely or to be varied, and you'll see from the officer report that we're recommending it be varied so that there is still a limit on permitted development rights relating to boundary treatments. As I've mentioned in the presentation, it's considered, given the position of the site and other fencing in the area in closer positions, that the fence wouldn't be out of character with the street scene or the locality. The area is no longer public open space, and the development has been carried out in accordance with the revised scheme that members granted in 2019. I'm not aware that there are any other outstanding points or that the dwelling is being built at variation to those plans as granted. Members will also see, as Mr. Waller pointed out, that rather than take formal enforcement action, there's a condition requiring the fences to be implemented within 2 months, which would be a similar comparable period for compliance were we to consider formal action if that was warranted. Obviously, we would be prevented from considering formal action during the time an application to regularise was being considered. So that's where we are this evening.
Thank you. I'm presuming the fact that Mr. Waller was mentioning about an untidy, not finished site, that's not within anything to do with this application at all.
Just to confirm, The section 215 untidy site isn't recommended to be applied where the condition of land arises from development that we've granted or permitted, or it's work in progress, for example, where works are clearly ongoing. I'd also reiterate that, as the speaker said, there is no planning permission for the development of a second plot, and we are considering that land to the rear, even though it's been fenced off, as garden land to the authorised dwelling. And the plan being considered tonight shows no fence immediately to the rear of the house, so that should be removed.
Okay. Right. Do we have Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's the house that was built is a metre further forward than it should be. That was the gist of it. But anyway, we're voting on that the fencing that the officers have said needs to be 2 metres back, and they're taking the old fence down, which is next to his back of his house, and we're having some nice native edging round, which will make up for the oak trees that the chap pulled down originally. So there'd be biodiversity gain. But he would have to do this, put these fences where you say.
Yeah, and also the fences have to be lowered, and also and it all has to be done within 2 months of the growing season.
No, the fences provided in
immediately
within 2 months, and then the planting in the first season following occupation of the dwelling.
Okay, right. I have Councillor Tillotson and Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. A bit of clarification, really. Did Deborah just say the fence that's been put up very close to the rear of the new building needs to come down? Is that what Deborah said, first of all?
Well, the fence that's been erected is 2.25 metres high and doesn't form part of the proposal before us tonight. So it isn't a fence that's being sought to be retained.
Thank you. I am very concerned about that. I agree with the concerns of local people that it does look like it's separated another building plot and leaving a very tiny garden for the existing new build house, and I'm really quite unhappy about that. I think it would be overdevelopment were that the case. So I feel we need to stress that the whole plot is the plot for this house, not creating a separate plot.
Mrs. Jackson, before I go to Councillor Lowe.
Yeah, I was just seeing if it would assist members if I put the plan back up on the screen.
Yeah, please.
I'll do that as I'm talking then. Oh no, that's the wrong button. Sorry, bear with me. Can members see that? So yes. As you can see, obviously we can't speculate on why the fence was put up the way it was. That's not the proposal in front of members tonight to be considered. The proposal in front of members tonight has the fence along Gisborough Way all the way down and along Bylands Avenue, set back from Bylands Avenue and the 2 metres from Gisborough Way. The existing fence that we saw is in this location, immediately to the adjacent, with this parcel of land separate. Obviously, there's no fence shown on this plan, and this is the plan that they're seeking to approve.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to commend Mr. Waller to start with, Chair, because I think he spoke very well and got his points across extremely well. So, well done. But in saying that, I can understand his concerns, but the application that's in front of us, I cannot see any reason whilst we could not accept it. Looking at the pictures on other properties, they've got the fence up. That precedent has been set, so therefore I go with officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lowe.
Second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I have no further speakers or hand showing or waving? Oh, Councillor Forrest.
Sorry to be a nuisance, Chair. Can either Deborah or Jackie tell us? We pass this tonight and we say you do this within 2 months. If he doesn't do it within 2 months, or he does something else entirely, what happens then, please?
Goes to enforcement.
Yeah, as Councillor Fryer just mentioned, it would be referred to planning enforcement team, who could consider taking formal planning enforcement action, as Mr. Waller pointed out, whether that be an enforcement notice or a breach of condition notice. But that would require the removal of those fences and the enforcement of the condition.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go to the vote. And oh, sorry, Catherine.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. If I could just add to what Debbie said, just to be completely clear, it would go to planning enforcement, but they would then need to, I want there to be a suggestion, we would take enforcement action because it would have to be considered at the time.
Yes.
On the situation as it was, and there's considerations to take then.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Bentley.
4, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Camsell.
4, Chair.
Councillor Capleton.
4, Chair.
Councillor Charles.
4, Madam Chair.
Councillor Forrest.
4, Madam Chair, thank you.
Councillor Howe.
I'll abstain, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
4, Chair.
Councillor Ransom.
4, Chair.
Councillor Savage.
4, Chair.
Councillor Tassell.
4, Chair.
Councillor Tillotson.
4, Chair.
Councillor Ward.
4, Chair.
Right, and I'm 4, so that's 1, 2, 3. That's 12, 4 and 1 abstention. If Ms. Harrison would like to confirm.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I can confirm it was carried with a vote 12 in favour and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Right, I'd like to thank everybody, officers, speakers, and fellow councillors very much for another long meeting, but it is our duty as a plans committee to consider everything and go through it. I hope you all have a good Easter. The weather for the next few days is supposed to be good then, but I think it might be cold at Easter. I wish you all a very happy Easter and remind you that you now have no planning meetings until the 22nd of